Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. When Luffy vanishes inside ancient ruins, the Straw Hats are pulled into a terrifying journey through his past. Trapped within Luffy's memories, the crew witnesses moments of brotherhood with Ace and Sabo, childhood pain, and scars Luffy never shared. As past and present blur, the Straw Hats must confront truths that were never meant for them to see, learning what truly shaped their captain. To escape, they must not only find Luffy, but also come to terms with the weight of the memories he carried alone. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Respect to author.
Chapter 27, For Whom the Golden Bell Tolls. So we're finally going to see the Golden City. Brook cried happily. If he had eyes, they would be wide with excitement. Oh, my heart feels as if it will burst from my chest. If I had a heart that is. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Well, you're in for a show, I can promise you that, Nami said, knowing that she wasn't going to like this. As amazing as it all was, riding on that flying ark with Eneru wasn't worth it. What a horrible day this was. But they followed the four through the thick greenery, and it started off with Zoro starting to stray off to one direction with Luffy yelling after him that was the wrong way and that they were supposed to go west, but... Luffy, you dope, you're not going west, Nami said, rolling her eyes, that's east. Oh, come on Luffy. Use your head for something other than a hat rack for a change. Memory, Zoro called after him, pointing to his right. We're supposed to go to the skull's right eye, so we gotta go right, rubber brain. How does that make any sense? Usopp asked, almost falling over at that logic. What? Zoro asked in annoyance. You said the right eye, so I was going right. It's not the same thing, you idiot. Nami yelled at him as he shrugged unconcerned. Apparently she wasn't the only one who thought that. They've both lost their minds, Memory, Chopper whispered as Robin knelt down to whisper to him. Why don't you go tell those two heroes, we're supposed to be going south before they end up lost. Not that that did any good, Chopper sighed, remembering how they all got separated after getting attacked by that snake and how he was alone when he was forced to run from all that fighting. He shook his head as a shiver went up his spine. He would have been better off getting burnt at the altar than running around the middle of a battlefield. Well, they're both wrong, Nami sighed, feeling a little more sweat drop around her brow. Now this is sad when pirates can't tell which way to go. You both are hopeless. I'll remember that the next time something dangerous pops up, Zoro said in deep annoyance. You can fight off that slime thing when it comes crawling out from somewhere. Memory, Chopper nodded in understanding to Robin, and then went running after them, yelling that they were supposed to go south instead. Luffy picked up a long stick and soon began following after Robin, who was leading them directly south. South, huh? Luffy asked as he happily swung the stick around like a baton. You should have said so sooner. I clearly remember saying that you had to go south before we split, Nami said in exasperation. One of these days he will have to learn to listen. They all rolled their eyes, knowing that stopping Luffy long enough to listen was like trying to part the tides themselves. But they followed after the four through the overgrown and oversized forest. They walked on for about 15 minutes, with Chopper wanting to find a stick like Luffy's, and so far it had been very quiet walk. But as Luffy dragged his stick across one tree, he suddenly asked, the City of Gold's got a really big bell in it, right? Nolan did mention that in his logbook. Yes, Memory, Robin confirmed as she thought about it. A great bell and a city of gold. Brook giggled to himself happily, acting like a little kid going to an amusement park. Why do you ask, Luffy? Past Zoro asked inquiringly as Chopper looked up at him and curiously as well. A big grin suddenly appeared on Luffy's face, as if he had been planning a big surprise for someone. I got a really good idea, he giggled to himself, and that got Chopper's attention. He stopped walking and turned up to him, his eyes bright as he asked him to tell him what it was. Yeah, what? Frankie asked, suddenly having a foreboding feeling that this wasn't going to be as easy as Luffy was going to make it sound. If we give that ginormous bell a good ringing, I bet that old timer and those monkeys down below would hear it, don't you think? Luffy asked them as the others just smiled at his plan. Chopper beamed, fully agreeing with that. Yeah, I bet they would, Luffy decided. So that's what you meant. Brook called happily, when you said that you were sure Cricket-san and the others got the message. Luffy-san rang the bell, didn't he? None of them answered him, but they were all smiling, which was all the proof that they needed. Frankie sniffled at that, his eyes burning with tears as he thought about it all. If Old Man Cricket and his monkey pals did hear the ringing, even from above the clouds, then that meant that all his years of searching and never giving up weren't in vain. What a great thing to do for them. He sobbed openly as the others became a little dazed in the eyes as they remembered hearing the beautiful sound of that bell. They all hoped that that memory would be shown, when Luffy finally defeated that fake god and sounded the bell. That had truly been something to witness. They walked on for a little while before Memory Chopper began swinging his own stick around. He was smiling and laughing, clearly having a good day as he said happily, "I thought this forest would be scarier. But so far it's been nice and peaceful." "You sure sound like you're enjoying yourself, Chopper-san," Brook said. "I felt so safe with these guys," Chopper sighed before he added, "at least before we lost each other." "Lost each other?" Usopp asked in surprise. "You'll see very soon," Robin answered, smiling a little as Memory Chopper laughed happily and Luffy looked back playfully and teased, "Hey, Chopper. You're in a pretty good mood today, you feeling courageous for a change?" "Yep," he laughed, "you betcha." Well, that sure didn't last long, Chopper thought grimly. Why did they have to come to this island when there was a war? He wondered if the others had as hard a time as he did. "Yeah, you're right," Memory Zoro suddenly said, "the forest really has been a big disappointment. Nothing but birds and trees for 2 whole days, makes me wanna scream, I'm so bored." "Well, count yourself as lucky," Usopp said darkly as Zoro finished, "we haven't even seen one of Eneru's priests, so I know exactly how you feel, Chopper." "No you don't," Current Chopper whispered quietly as his past self laughed a little more. Memory Robin smiled back at them. "Listen to the two of you," she said, sounding like a mother talking to her boys who were complaining about not having anything to do. "Are you that eager for something dangerous to happen?" "Not at all," Chopper and Usopp said together. Memory Chopper laughed some more, but it had died in his throat so suddenly that they all looked back to see that he was now staring behind them at what appeared to be a very strange, stripy-looking root there. Past Chopper was muttering to himself about where it came from until it started moving. Did that root just move? Brook whispered, suddenly having a very bad feeling to all this. "That's not a root," Zoro muttered as Luffy called back to Chopper, asking what he saw back there, which Chopper quickly denied seeing anything. "If it's not a root, then what is it?" Frankie asked quickly, noticing how everyone was having nervous looks. Rather than answer him, Robin turned to their Chopper and asked, "Why didn't you mention it to us?" "Yeah, a little warning would have been good," Zoro added. Chopper looked down in embarrassment. Thinking back now, he knew that it was stupid. "I thought if I said that I saw a moving root you'd laugh at me for getting scared over nothing," he mumbled. "And I guess that I just really wanted it to be just my imagination." "Well, I can't say I blame you for that," Zoro said after thinking that. "That thing was a nightmare to fight. But what made you think we'd laugh at you?" Robin smiled kindly at him. Chopper didn't answer as he kicked at the ground, and shrugged uncertainly. Truthfully, he had always wished that he was as strong and brave as his friends were. Up till here, he had always relied on the others to protect him. Even when he fought in Alabasta, he had Usopp there to back him up. There had always been a small part of him that feared that he didn't truly belong here in the crew because he wasn't like any of them. But he knew now that it was because he wasn't like them did he belong. He suddenly remembered Luffy's speech back at Arlong Park and fully understood his words. He reached up and tugged his hat a little over his eyes, a habit that he picked up from his father. When the doctor was lost in thought, he would pull his hat over his eyes as he tried to get his thoughts in order. Chopper knew that he wasn't as brave or as strong as Luffy, he couldn't use swords like Zoro, he couldn't cook like Sanji, he couldn't navigate or draw maps like Nami, he couldn't shoot like Usopp, he couldn't read the past like Robin, he couldn't build like Frankie, nor could he play music like Brook. But he would never forget the first time he met Luffy, finding him with his skin almost frozen through and his fingers and toes nothing but bloody shreds. How could he have ever known that he would become who he was now? He smiled a little. From the moment that he pulled Luffy back up that mountain and treated them, he had been the one to care for the Straw Hats, to bandage them up and give them medicine. He had sat with them through the night if that was what it took to help them. He had always been the one to care for his crew and keep them healthy. He loved his crew, each and every one of them, and he wanted to be useful to them. That was all he wanted. He didn't say any of this to the others, but Robin was smiling, as if she knew just what he was thinking as Frankie poked the others for information. Wanting to know just what that thing was, Zoro told him to shut up as they continued following the memory Straw Hats for another 10 minutes.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Every few seconds, past Chopper glanced over his shoulder and he seemed to grow steadily whiter when he saw that Root was still there. Finally, Memory Zoro noticed how Chopper was acting and called, "Chopper. Why do you keep looking behind us?" "Huh," he called startled. "No reason. No reason at all. Should have known that there was something wrong here," Zoro said, a sideways smirk at Chopper who laughed a little as Luffy finally looked back and spotted the root as well. "Whoa," he said in surprise, "get a look at that weird stripy looking root back there." Oh that, Memory Chopper asked, blinking in surprise as the root was moving more than ever, so you guys can see it. Memory Zoro and Robin both looked as well and could see what they were talking about. I've never heard of roots moving before, Past Zoro muttered quietly. His eyes budging out of his head, Past Chopper cried out, oh no. You see that too? I thought I was just imagining things. Chopper sighed, still wondering if they could have stayed together here if he had spoken up sooner. The ground suddenly began to shudder, and in front of them, a head rose up and they could see what it was. It was a snake, one bigger than most buildings and long enough to reach out to the sky well above the trees. Its mouth alone was big enough to swallow them all with no room restrictions. It was blue in color with a single row of white hair on both sides, along its body. It had small, yellow eyes and two long whiskers hanging from a spot above its mouth, like a mustache, and it was covered in blue wavy lines across its body with some kind of purple substance dripping from its sword-long fangs. A snake. Brooke and Frankie screamed in shock, looking ready to run. I forgot how big that overgrown inchworm is, Sanji muttered. Boy did it give us trouble, Zoro sighed, remembering when he was stuck fighting it. Its scales were harder than steel, nothing could phase that thing, at least nothing did till Eneru was through with it. What, didn't we have a party with that thing? Sanji asked, remembering how the snake had allowed people to dance on its head as they celebrated for those 4 days. You, partied with that thing. Frankie spoke up, his eyes wide as he stared up at the massive snake. It looked anything but friendly at the moment. Easy for you to say, you didn't see it when it was mad, Zoro muttered darkly as the snake looked down at them, its tongue flicking in and out. Run for it, it's a giant snake. Luffy yelled out, but there was excitement on his face as they all turned and ran off with the serpent right on their heels. The present-day Straw Hats were all forced to, once again, run behind them to keep up. By far, Memory Chopper was the one freaking out the most. He was running, screaming with tears in his eyes as the past version of Robin stared back at it in amazement. It's enormous, she yelled, her eyes wide. I wonder if it's another result of the environment up here. How could you admire it when it was trying to eat you? Frankie demanded. Why didn't you just attack it then? Usopp yelled at Zoro. You make it sound so easy. Zoro snapped back in frustration. But Luffy didn't care. He loved every minute of it even as Memory Zoro got sick of running and turned to face it. Well, you can't say that you didn't ask for trouble. Usopp yelled, pointing an accusing finger at their Zoro. So really, it's your fault. Shut up. Zoro snapped back as his past self snarled. Alright catfish face, it's time for you to die. But as he drew his sword, the snake launched itself at him with such surprising speed that he was forced to jump out of the way to the tree branches above them to avoid getting. But with him out of the way, the snake was now barreling towards Luffy and Chopper, who were also forced to jump out of the way, with Robin using her powers to jump out of harm's way. Memory Zoro called out from above them, how can something so big move so freaking fast? Size is no guarantee of speed, Robin answered as she watched as the snake suddenly tried to go after them again, but only managed to bite into the base of one of the large trees. As they watched, they could suddenly see the purple cloud of smoke from under its mouth and smelt burning wood. Ah, guys, Usopp asked with a gulp. That purple stuff from its fangs. It's venom, Zoro nodded as they watched the snake open its jaw and release the tree, with the base of the trunk destroyed and melted away. Acid, Memory Chopper screamed out in horror. The 4 of them each had a different emotion on their faces, everything from excitement to terror. Ah, change of plans, Past Zoro said, looking tense, we're running away. I agree with that plan. Usopp and Nami both nodded firmly at that. Sounds good, Memory Robin agreed, sounding calm as Luffy cheered at the idea, like they were just going to be playing tag or something with the serpent. As the tree slowly fell, the snake turned back to look at them. Don't let that venom touch you. It's death. Memory Zoro screamed out in warning as Luffy swung from a branch, actually taunting the snake to come after him. But it had turned its attention to Robin instead, who was directly above him. Sanji and Past Chopper screamed for her to get out of there, but it already went straight up at her. However, she had been able to create a kind of chain of arms and used it to swing out of Worm's way. Ha, nice try, she called as the snake curled around the trees, clearly wondering what happened. Yeah, you go girl, Nami cheered with a beaming smile. The snake then noticed Chopper on the ground, who got so freaked out by it, that when he changed into his walk point, he still ran upright from it. This way Whiskers. Luffy laughed as he continued swinging happily away. How can you think that this is fun? Usopp hollered angrily after him. And that was how it was, the snake went after whoever was closest to it, while all of them were forced to running, dodging, swinging and doing everything they could to avoid it. It was almost impossible to keep up with any of them. There was so much yelling and destruction going on that they couldn't make heads or tails of what was happening. But after several chaotic minutes, they were able to follow after Luffy, who had finally managed to lose the snake, but he had also ended up losing the other 3 as well. Where are you all? Frankie yelled anxiously, staring around for their past selves. We all got lost from each other, Robin answered, looking around at the grove of strange striped trees that they had wandered into. That snake made us lose sight of each other, and as far as I know, I was the only one who made it to the ruins. I didn't see any of you boys until the upper ruins had been destroyed. Same here, Zoro said. Well, at least until I found you, Chopper. I don't remember much of anything, Chopper said with a frown. Though he had been proud of himself that he had been able to take out one of the priests, he still felt a sense of shame that he wasn't able to help them all fight in the end. What are you talking about? Brook asked, still lost as ever. The upper ruins. I don't know how to describe it, Robin answered with a frown. Especially since she's sure that they won't be seeing it since Luffy wasn't there, not that she was aware of. Luffy was now muttering to himself, looking as confused as Brook was, as he said, now what? Where did everybody go? Did they get lost? He thought it over before he decided, I better keep moving. I'll catch up with them later at the ruins. Robin said we had to go south, and it always gets warmer when you go south, so I go this way. And then he went walking off in one direction. That idiot, Nami hissed, slapping her forehead, that's southwest. Okay, so you were all lost from each other, but what happened to you all? Frankie asked. No one could really answer him that. None of them really seemed to know the whole story to what was going on here. As they tried to gather their thoughts, after a few more minutes, Luffy began to sing happily to himself. Oh, the islands in the south are warm. And their heads get really hot. They grow pineapples, they grow coconuts. And they're morons. Yo-ho-ho-ho. He's tone deaf. Brook said happily. What a dumb song, Nami whispered to herself just as they heard the baying of a goat calling from somewhere, and Luffy stopped dead as he looked around excitedly. Sky goats? Brook asked, expecting to see giant goats come in. No, Zoro said, rolling his eyes as he jerked his thumb above them. Standing on top of a milky road just above them, a man who was completely bald, had long ears and even horns on his head, was standing there clad in white. What is he? Frankie asked with a deadpanned expression. Is he half goat? I don't know, but probably, Sanji muttered with a shrug. They were the Divine Squad, Nami whispered darkly, Eneru's soldiers. His servants, Brook said in surprise. Apparently while we were at the altar, the Shandorians found out that you guys took care of Satori, Zoro said grimly. And decided that they could use that as a chance to take out the other priests and Eneru. Really? Frankie asked, eyes wide, so Eneru set his whole army on them. I don't know the whole story, he shrugged. I think I know, Nami whispered softly, but before she could explain it to them, as Luffy was now calling out for the goat to come out. As he called, the goat man jumped, heading straight at him, but acting instinctively, Luffy punched him so hard that he went flying. Like a pinball, he crashed into a tree trunk, went flying up and crashed into a branch, before he fell to the ground, his ass in the air, and lost consciousness. Ow, Frankie winced, that had to hurt. Well, that was pathetic, Zoro stated in a bored tone. He noticed that, why was it the servants of the nutjobs were such weaklings? It was when they got higher up did things become increasingly more difficult. Luffy might not know hockey yet, Sanji spoke up, now chewing on the end of a long blade of grass since he was dying for a smoke. But his scents are so sharp that he almost didn't need it. Truly amazing, Brook said happily as Luffy walked over and picked up his fallen straw hat. Who's this jerk? He asked in annoyance. Man, he got me all excited, he pouted as he put his hat back on. I thought I was gonna get to see a goat. He's upset over that, Usopp asked, shaking his head. Not over the fact that this guy tried to kill him. He's funny that way, Robin giggled to herself. Still frowning, Luffy marched off, but cheered up enough to continue on with the next verse of his stupid song. But he didn't get far. Luffy suddenly stopped dead and was looking off to his side with a tense expression. Surprised, they all looked and saw that Luffy wasn't alone. Standing up on some giant roots was the Shandorian Wiper. He was looking as ill-tempered as he had the last time they saw him, carrying a bazooka over his arm, and his right arm bandaged from his fingers to his shoulder. His left shoulder, however, and part of his wing had been burnt and scarred. He was a mess. I guess this fight had taken its toll on him, Brook said as Usopp gulped and moved back a little. Memory or not, this guy gave him the creeps. Wiper's temper was as mean as a sea king's. Wiper was glaring down at Luffy as their captain looked back up at him.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Oh, it's you, Luffy muttered, his voice was unusually cold. That's right, Wiper said threateningly, and just what are you doing here? I warned you to leave this island. What makes him think that we should have listened? Zoro shrugged. I don't know, after I heard about God, I wanted to leave, Usopp muttered. But would anyone listen to me? No, big baby, Sanji stated. Shut up, I can do whatever I want. Luffy retorted. Damn right, Zoro said. Would you all shut up? Nami asked irritably. The others looked at her, they knew that Nami was probably the only person who could get them to do something they didn't want to. No, you can't, Wiper said angrily, a warning clear in his tone. This land belongs to us Shandorians. After hearing their story, that is true, Brook said softly, but Luffy-san and the rest of you haven't done anything to them. Why is he going around picking fights? He means well, but his determination can blind him and he can become violent. Zoro shrugged, at least that's what I picked up on him. He knew that the guy wasn't completely heartless. After all, he had been fighting as hard as the rest of them. And once he understood Luffy's goal, he was moved by his efforts and even risked his own life to help them take down that beanstalk. Huh, it does? Luffy asked, looking around him at the trees in surprise. Really? I thought it was God's. Well, then, he said, bowing his head, I beg your pardon. Though better, he still needs to work on his tact. Sanji sighed despairingly. Besides, I doubt that he's going to let bro go that easily, Frankie muttered. Luffy then began to head off once again, humming his song as if nothing happened. Hold it, Wiper called angrily. Now what? Luffy yelled in annoyance, but Wiper looked aggravated, as if he was thinking something over before he came to a decision. I don't like that look in his eyes, Usopp whispered nervously, suddenly having a very bad feeling to all this. No, Wiper finally decided, I'm through wasting words on you. He turned to face him with his eyes closed, and I'm sick and tired of listening to your idiotic babbling. He held up his bazooka and pointed it at him as his eyes snapped open, a deep anger quickly building there. So I'm gonna destroy you. For what? Brook yelled in shock. As far as he could see, Luffy-san was just taking a walk. Even if the land rightfully did belong to the Shandorians, they didn't have to kill everyone else who came there, did they? But Luffy remained calm. He didn't even look surprised by what Wiper said, merely annoyed. I see, he said, and he threw the stick over his shoulder so fast that it was a blur. He grinned as he took his backpack off and held his hands up, his knuckles cracking as he smirked. If you wanna fight, you just have to say so. He laughed a little. No, Luffy, it's not worth it, Chopper cried worriedly. But there was nothing any of them could do. Wiper then shot a cannonball from his bazooka, which Luffy easily inflated and deflected like he did when he attacked them in the crow. The black ball was sent flying narrowly over Wiper's injured shoulder and blew up the tree behind them. You think he'd had learned that from the last time, Sanji muttered. Some people never learn, Zoro answered with a shrug. Yeah, and you two would know that better than anyone, would you? Robin asked teasingly, and Sanji swooned happily. Oh, Robin, your smile is as beautiful as any angel. He gasped out, hearts back in his eyes as she smiled. I love that side of you as well. Meanwhile, Luffy deflated back to normal and challenged, you'll never be able to hurt me with that thing. If all that guy has is cannonballs, then he's right, Frankie pointed out. Don't count him out yet, Nami whispered, thinking of painful clarity of when he went up against Eneru. He's no one-trick pony. I've seen how far he's willing to go. But Wiper didn't listen to what Luffy said as he shot two more black balls at him, which Luffy easily deflected once again. And it went on like this for a while. Wiper just didn't seem to get it as he kept firing. It didn't matter how many balls that he used, it wasn't going to hurt him. I can do this all day if you want. Luffy yelled, though he sounded out of breath, but you can't win. Rifles and cannons won't leave a scratch on me. Rubber body and all. So it would seem, Wiper agreed after a moment of thought. Time for a change of tactics. That was when he spit out cigarillo before his eyes darkened. This couldn't be good, and they all had foreboding feelings as they watched him pull out a small dial and fit it into his bazooka and fired that. But instead of another cannonball, it was a gust of strong wind. What's he doing this time? Brook yelled as Chopper's nose sniffed the air and his eyes widened. That's gas, he screamed as Luffy was coughing and gasping for air as he covered his mouth and nose. You've got to be kidding, Frankie said, thinking it all over. Just one little spark is all that's going to take, and if it goes off. This weapon is called the burn bazooka, Wiper said in a cold voice and interrupted his thoughts. By igniting the gas released from the breath dial, a deadly blue flame is created, which will incinerate everything in its path. Let's see if you can bounce this back at me. Something tells me that Luffy can't do that, Robin answered coolly. Hello. WHO can. Usopp screamed at her as Wiper pulled the trigger and there it came. It was a path of blue fire from the weapon. They could see it in front of them, a light so bright that it was blinding. Luffy. Chopper screamed, terror going through him, dodge. Thankfully, Luffy did just in time. If he had stayed just a couple seconds longer he would have been burnt to a crisp. The fire had ended up burning a hole right through the tree behind them. Damn, that's some serious firepower. Frankie whistled. Now is not the time to be admiring that. Usopp yelled and slapped Frankie's head. But he quickly calmed down. He gets so caught up in the moment that he keeps forgetting that all this already happened a long time ago. Taking several deep breaths, he looked back to see that Luffy was already back on his feet. He was shaken, but unharmed. As he glared around for Wiper, a sudden noise caused Luffy to stare up in time to see the warrior right above him and aimed a kick at his head. Luffy was then forced to bend over backwards to avoid it. By this point both of their faces were full of anger. By this point, however, some of the Straw Hats were actually starting to enjoy watching the fight. It was non-stop action the whole way. It would have been a lot better if their faces were full of so much fury. Luffy threw another punch which was blocked by Wiper's foot, who used the momentum from it to send himself flying backwards. Luffy didn't wait around for him to fire that burned bazooka again as he stretched out of the way as the fire came and was clinging to the trees like a spider. So far this fight is pretty well matched, Sanji said impressed. He had a feeling that this guy was strong, but he was surprised that Luffy was struggling so soon. But he wasn't worried, this fight had only just begun after all. Come on Luffy, Chopper yelled eagerly. Luffy soon launched himself back at Wiper, aiming another kick, which Wiper blocked his foot with his own. But soon the fight got nasty from that point onward. After Luffy tried a series of punches that Wiper endured until he was able to get behind him, he fired his weapon once again. At that, Luffy started to get irritated. He was able to stretch himself out of firing range and hung from a tree overhead as the fire burned. He then let go and tried his gum stamp to get at him, but Wiper was gliding along the root of a large tree to get up into the air as well. Jumping up, Chopper tried to give Luffy's a heads up, but Wiper somehow got his feet underneath Luffy's arms, flipped him over his head and sent him crashing to the ground below. Come on Luffy, I know you can do better than that, Nami yelled, remembering how easily this guy dealt with all three of the monster trio before they arrived at Heaven's Gate. Don't let this guy walk all over you. Luffy seemed to agree and they were all getting sick of Wiper using that weapon. He was forced to avoid it once again, and he rocketed himself out of the way. Now looking seriously ticked off, Luffy yelled, so you like bazookas huh? He stretched his arms back, ready to launch a bazooka of his own, get a load of this. This is going to be explosive, Sanji betted. Now you die, Wiper screamed out as they were about to attack, and their attacks hit the other at the same time. Luffy was finally hit by the fire as his fist ended up shattering Wiper's shield and hit him hard, both of the fighters were sent flying backwards. Where is the sense in all this? Brook cried out, truly not understanding how they ended up fighting in the first place. Nami just rolled her eyes. Men, just what was it about them that they had to fight all the time? Even when there was no point. Both boys here got hit hard. They went crashing to the ground, with Wiper crashing into a tree before he began spitting up blood, and Luffy was burnt and covered in ash as he lay several yards away. However, they all knew that they weren't going to die that easily for they were both getting back to their feet. Wiper now seemed seriously ticked off and bellowed out, where are you Straw Hat? I'll find you, I know you're still alive. This guy has got some serious anger management issues, Zoro muttered. Of course, he already knew that when he was forced to fight off those Shandorians who kept coming after him. His one eye twitched at the painful reminder at how hard a time he had of fighting that one guy with the blinding pistols. He couldn't see anything and ended getting his ass kicked there for a while. He sighed, but he brightened up greatly as he remembered when he fought that angler fishman back at Fishman Island. He smirked, he was weak in these days because he did rely too much on his sight. Anger management, Sanji repeated, his eyebrow raised as he glanced at Zoro. Like you're one to talk Moss head. What was that? Snarled Zoro. See what I mean? Sanji poked fun at him as Zoro had to fight the urge to pull out his sword and stab him. No, that would only prove that he was right, even if he did kill him, he would be forced to live with that. He would wait until later to kill him. After catching his breath, Luffy sat up and yelled, yeah. And I plan on staying that way. Something that we all intend, Brook said loyally. They smiled at him, before turning back to the fight. But as Luffy got ready to charge ahead once again, something appeared behind him, a familiar pair of glowing, golden eyes. Brook, Usopp, and Chopper all screamed in shock, and as the memory faded, the last thing that they saw was a dark hole behind Luffy and he was suddenly flying backwards into the darkness. What happened? Frankie yelled anxiously, fearing the worst. What was that whole thingy? That was the snake, Nami whispered, remembering seeing a similar dark hole when she had been eaten by that thing. Snake. The three yelled at her. That moron had to get eaten, did he? Sanji sighed. Well, he knew that this had to have happened, how else did Luffy know about all the gold inside that thing's stomach? In a way, maybe it was a good thing, after all, they never would have gotten all that money right. That's about right, Nami sighed grimly. He thought that he was stuck inside a cave that kept having earthquakes and floods if you can believe that. You're kidding me. Frankie actually laughed. That's what he said, she answered, fighting back a smile herself. It was funny, though stupid as that was, she found that kinda endearing now after all this time. The next memory appeared once more and they were in a place that could easily been mistaken for a cave. It was dark and full of space, full of broken buildings and dead trees, bits of golden treasures scattered every several yards. Nami gasped happily as she stared at the treasure, wishing that she could pick them up once again. This is the inside of Snake? Zoro asked, staring around at the rotten trees. I guess, Frankie said just as they heard a loud groan behind them and looked to see that Luffy had just pulled his head out of the ground and was looking around him. Everything stopped, he said, sounding a little dazed. Where am I? You're in the stomach of a giant snake. That's where you are, Usopp called loudly, as if hoping that Luffy could hear him. And I thought Luffy ate strange things, Sanji muttered to himself as he looked to an old skull that was lying at his feet. Well, it wouldn't be that hard to get out right, Frankie asked with a smirk. Just wait until the snake has two. But Nami gave him a deadly look and yelled, don't even finish that disgusting thought. Luffy pushed himself up and stared around at the mystery cave, as he called it before he walked on, muttering about how he hoped that the others didn't go to the City of Gold without him. Since nothing else seemed to be happening for a while, the others took this time to tell Frankie and Brook everything that happened to them. Nami explained that while they were taking the Mary through Upper Yard, Eneru had appeared on their ship so that he could speak to Gonfall face to face. When Sanji and Usopp tried to attack him, he used his ability to electrocute them, rendering them both out cold. After which, he told Gonfall that he had declared that there would be, what he called, the survival game. There would be a fight between his divine warriors, the Shandorians, the Straw Hats, and even he, himself, was part of it. You mean that he was having all those people out here, risking their lives, and he thought it was some kind of game? Brook demanded in outrage. And that should be your first clue to what kind of monster Eneru really is, she muttered bitterly. So that's what happened, Sanji said as he scratched his head and thought it all over. He didn't remember anything that happened after Eneru showed up. All he could clearly remember was waking up in the cabin a few hours later with Usopp on the bed next to him. He shuddered at the thought of waking up and seeing him there after he had been dreaming of Nami. But why did he come on board and tell you that? Frankie asked, not understanding the point. Why else but to brag? Sanji asked bitterly. Nami also explained that Eneru told Gonfall that he had no use for the island anymore and that he was going to leave once the survival game was over. Immediately afterwards, Satori's brothers Hotori and Kotori arrived to get revenge for what they did to Satori. But working together, Nami and Gonfall were able to defeat him. Now I can see the family resemblance, she sighed, thinking of the puffball that was in charge of the ordeal of spheres. That was so brave of you. Sanji swooned happily at her. Moron, Zoro mentioned, but even he had to admit that she stood her ground for once and fought to protect them for once. What did you say? Sanji demanded. Enough, both of you, Nami snapped. But she smiled to herself as she thought back. Though it was against two idiots, and she didn't do it alone, she was proud of herself for that. She protected the ship and the crew. That was all that mattered. But she just smiled as Sanji lovingly did what she told him to do. Anyway, she said, after that, the weird old man left the ship with his freaky bird-horse hybrid so that they could try to find out what Eneru meant and what he was up to. But as I was trying to figure out how to treat you two, Canis, her dad, and Isa showed up. They showed up there, Chopper said in great surprise. Yeah, see, they wanted to help us escape from the upper yard so they came to get us and led us out of there, Nami smiled. As well as brought us our repaired waiver. Oh, what kind-hearted people. Frankie cried, weeping loudly as he cried. It truly touches my heart. If I had one, yo-ho-ho-ho, Brook laughed, but who is Isa? Oh, right, Nami said, hitting her head as she remembered that they weren't there. Well, you see, Isa is this little Shandorian girl who wanted to come to the upper yard to help her friends after she heard their voices disappearing. Their voices, Usopp repeated, sounding lost before he understood. Oh, right, she was born with really strong haki, wasn't she? She was. Brook asked in great surprise, you mean you can be born able to use it? It is very rare, Robin answered, thinking of everything she learned about haki. But it has been known to happen. They have incredibly sharp hearing and can hear things from miles away. Most of the time they have no idea how they can do it. I remember that, Chopper said excitedly. You know, I met a girl named Daisy a long time ago. Just before we got to Water 7. She could hear just like that. Who? Nami asked, a little confused. Daisy. Chopper answered her, I met her at, but he trailed off for a moment as a look of polite confusion came over his face. That's strange, I don't remember. You don't know where you met her? Brook asked in surprise. Chopper gave his head a little shake. For some reason, his mind felt a little foggy as he tried to remember. Don't you guys remember? She was part of that funny family. But as he struggled to say his words, he shook his head and sighed. That's funny, I don't know anymore. I mean I remember meeting her, I think, I was in some kind of a graveyard and… Graveyard? Robin asked curiously. Yeah, Chopper nodded firmly, still frowning a little, I remember. She had a brother and a sister, and her papa. They were playing pirates or something, I think. You sure you didn't just dream her up? Zoro asked bored. I know I didn't. Chopper yelled at him before calmed down and asked, you guys all met her didn't you? Nami blinked as she thought back to a little girl named Daisy. As her memory cleared a little, she did remember that they met her on some kind of island. She vaguely recalled waking up and there were a couple little kids calling Chopper, Mr. Reindeer, or something like that. Now that you mention it, she whispered, yeah, I do remember. Really? Chopper asked in relief. That was good, he had been worried that maybe he did dream her up or something. But he frowned a little more as bits and pieces came back to him. Wait, there was something, as if through a cloud as thick as the island clouds up here in Skypia, a voice echoed somewhere in the back of his mind. He could hear his own voice say in worry, I told you to get away. Huh, who was he speaking to? What are you kids doing? Yelled another voice from far off, come on we have to get away. Papa, a girl's voice said, and she was pleading, sounding terrified, please save Mr. Reindeer. You're strong, right? Save him. Save him from what? Show us how strong you are. A boy's voice sounded. Chopper was shaking his head violently, trying to clear the fog, but instead the clouds seemed to come together even tighter until he couldn't even remember what he was talking about. Who was that? You still talking about that Daisy girl? Zoro asked as Chopper rubbed his head, remembering where he was. Oh, no, Chopper said. Funny, I can't remember what it was I was thinking about here. But I do remember meeting Daisy. Okay, we can talk about that later, Frankie said impatiently. What I want to know is what else that was going on here. This Isa girl, why did she come to such a dangerous place like this? Right, Nami spoke up, feeling a little foggy as she put Daisy and her family out of her mind for now. If she couldn't clearly remember, then it wasn't anything to worry about for now. But as she went on, Chopper was still frowning as he tried to think back. What was that memory just now? Who was he talking to? But when Nami spoke up again, he also decided to worry about it later. She came because she could hear voices disappearing and was worried about her friends, Nami explained. Apparently as she was crossing the White Sea, her waver broke down and Canis and Pagaya saved her from being eaten by sky sharks. Not long after that, the snake appeared and started going crazy. That was when me and Isa were chased by it. Now I know that it was Luffy who was making it crazy. Must have been something it ate, Frankie teased with a laugh. What about the rest of you then? Brook asked as he looked to Chopper, Zoro, and Robin. Zoro shrugged in an unconcerned way as he mentioned fighting some Shandorians before he ended up at some ruins where there was a fight going on. He decided not to mention getting carried off by that south bird and then dropped. The crab cook was never going to let him forget it. But Chopper puffed his chest out proudly as he told them that he had stumbled into the ordeal of swamp and fought Eneru's priest Gidatsu. After a hard battle, he was able to beat him in the end and really become part of the crew. That's truly brave of you, Chopper-san, Brook commentated. That must have been a difficult fight if he could predict your moves. Yeah, it was, Chopper admitted, but, he added happily, I didn't have to fight from the altar or protect the Mary. So I had a fighting chance. Good for you, Chopper, Zoro said, and Chopper did a little dance at being complimented by someone as awesome as Zoro for doing a good job. Especially since he knew that Zoro could have taken Gidatsu on himself and beaten him in half the time. Chopper then said that he began to climb a giant beanstalk that was called Giant Jack. He thought that he could find the god on his own, but when he got up it, he was in the middle of some ruins, but that was where Eneru's final priest, Ohm, was waiting with his ordeal of iron. He admitted that he didn't remember too much after meeting Ohm, only that he got hurt really bad by him apparently. As they all smiled at him, Robin told them that she fought some commander named Yama in the ruins as she looked around for Shandora. She frowned a little as she mentioned that oversized oaf and how he had destroyed those ruins. She couldn't understand for the life of her why someone would regard history as meaningless. To her, there was nothing worse than destroying objects of historical significance. She had learned about ancient civilizations and cultures of the past, she had learned to read dead languages before she could even walk. She had been surrounded by a grand library and scholars who had dedicated their lives to learning about the past from the moment she was born. The idea that someone would disregard what their ancestors had once held sacred was unbelievable. That was why she couldn't forgive Yama for his destruction of the ruins. What he did was inexcusable. She smiled a little as she remembered those feelings, to learn, to know everything. And the only way that could happen is by learning from the past. Robin, Usopp asked when she stopped in her story, watching as Luffy found himself a golden necklace among the broken stones and examined it gleefully before he threw it away, muttering about wanting lunch. Don't throw that away, you idiot, Nami yelled. Just thinking, she smiled as she finished telling them that she ended up beating Yama before she headed to the skull's right eye. She sighed as she said that she had found a map of the city written on a stone. However, when she got there, she realized the layout of the land was all wrong, before she realized that the ancient city had been right below their feet all this time. Shandora had actually been covered up by island cloud all that time and the people there never realized it. But, when she got there, she hadn't found any trace of gold nor the golden bell. Nonetheless, she knew that it had to exist because she found a ponglai in the ruins that stated that there was another ponglai in the city, one that was right underneath the bell, which had once been the pride of the ancient Shandorians. A pride that they had even given the bell a name. The fire of Shandora. Frankie repeated softly, almost reverently as he thought it over, still following Luffy, who was now growing impatient of all this walking and just wanted to get out of the mystery cave. That's what it was called, Robin answered him. It sounds like it must be something else. Brook said before he realized what she was saying and asked, but, wait, if it wasn't in the city, then where was it? Well, she said slowly and Frankie and Brook leaned in dramatically. That would ruin the surprise, she said with a smile and Brook and Frankie almost fell over. You got us all excited for nothing. They yelled as she shrugged. I'm sorry, she said, though she didn't sound too sorry, but once you see it, I'm sure you'll understand. They had talked so long that they hadn't realized that they had finally reached a dead end, the back of the snake. Now Luffy was truly frustrated, saying that he had enough of this mystery cave, and wanted out. He then came up with the idea of breaking right through. Oh, Frankie winched as he watched Luffy stretch his arms back. This snake is in for a nasty bit of indigestion. That moron, Nami sighed, rubbing her head in an irritated way. To be fair, this place does look more like a cave than a python's belly, Robin pointed out as Luffy cried out his attack and slammed his hands to the wall. That had to hurt, Usopp whispered. At first, nothing seemed to happen before everything began to shake around them as if during an earthquake. Everything trembled violently, but then a flood of water came out at the other end of the cave, and Luffy screamed in horror. Where'd all that water come from? Brook screamed in shock as the water flooded the tunnel and dragged Luffy away from them. Nami remembered seeing the snake at the Milky Road, and reasoned with herself that it was probably getting water to try and calm its stomach since Luffy was inside doing all this damage. The memory shifted a little, as if Luffy was fighting to stay conscious, but the shaking stopped and the water calmed. Looking around worriedly, they found Luffy dragging himself out of shallow water, coughing and gasping for air. That had to be terrifying for any devil fruit user, Usopp said, glad that Luffy was able to pull himself out of that mess. Okay, they heard Luffy mutter to himself as he caught his breath, that was scary, what's with this lame cave anyhow? Again, it's not a cave, Luffy, Chopper whispered nervously, wondering just what was going to happen next. First there was an earthquake, then a flood of ocean clouds, I could have drowned. Luffy said, and he sounded real angry here as he began to scream and throw punch after punch to try and find a way out of this place. Nami sighed as she raised her eyebrows. She had a feeling that this must have been where she and Isa were getting chased by the thing. She shook her head, planning on having a few words with Luffy when they found him again. The cave started acting up again, and Luffy was getting tossed around like he was in a tornado. It eventually got to a point that none of them knew which way was up or down, which way was the front of the snake, or the back. Luffy never got seriously hurt thanks to his rubber body, but they could see from the look on his face that he wasn't enjoying this one bit. Okay, Frankie said irritably, this is getting confusing. The snake goes crazy and chases you and that little Isa girl up the beanstalk to where some ruins were. Yeah, that's right, Nami said after a moment. And that's where you were fighting? Frankie asked Zoro, who nodded. He then told them that when he got to the ruins, he was there with Ohm, Wiper, and even Gonfall, who demanded to know where Eneru was. As he fought with them, Nami and Isa showed up out of nowhere being chased by more of Eneru's soldiers. The snake chased you all that way? Robin asked Nami in surprise. Well, that thing only chased us about halfway before we were able to lose it, she sighed with a shrug. But then the Divine Squad started chasing us after that right up that beanstalk. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Why do you keep talking about a beanstalk? Frankie muttered to himself. And then what? Brook asked interestedly as Chopper nodded, still wanting to know everything that happened after he blacked out. Well, Zoro told them that when Wiper saw Isa with Nami, he tried to shoot her before realizing that Isa was in danger as well. Thankfully Gonfall and Pierre saved them, but that didn't last long since they were so distracted they didn't notice the python until it had eaten them. So then you guys all got eaten too? Brook yelled out. Nami sighed, thinking back to their own stupidity. They had been so busy trying to get away from Wiper's attack that they didn't see it until its mouth had already closed around them. That memory showed up though. They were back in what they called the tunnel, with Luffy walking towards some voices. They recognized one of them right away as Nami's own voice. There was also the sounds of the old man's and a young child. They walked on for only a few seconds before they watched as Luffy found them. Nami, Gonfall, Pierre, and a little girl with a fur dress and cap were there staring at him. After a quick talk, Luffy was astonished to hear that this mystery cave was actually the stomach of that giant snake, and he started to freak out. Isa and Gonfall seemed stunned when Memory Nami told him that he was actually the captain of their crew, especially after she gave Luffy a pounding after finding out that he was the reason the snake was going crazy and that he suggested that they could get out by finding its butthole. Nami's scary, Isa whispered, moving a little bit away from her after seeing the shape that Luffy was in. I know what you mean, child, she's meaner than the snake, Gonfall agreed in hushed tones. Zoro laughed at that and Nami gave him a hard punch to the head to shut him up. Usopp didn't dare say anything to that, but he had to admit that this wasn't disproving what they said. Though it was funny to watch, the earthquake started up and they were falling back down the tunnel with the memory quickly fading until they were all lying in a pile of debris. I can see why he's getting sick of this place, Zoro mentioned as he looked around. Pushing a large boulder off him, Luffy muttered, okay, this mystery cave is getting really annoying. I told you this isn't a cave, it's the snake's stomach. Memory Nami's voice said. Luffy looked around for her and freaked out when he saw a skeleton that was in clothes similar to Nami's, and he thought that she was dead until she appeared behind him and knocked him on the head. What a dope, current Nami sighed as they laughed around her good-naturedly. At least he cares, Robin laughed. Nami rolled her eyes. How could he think I said anything and been turned into a skeleton? I don't know, Brook said happily, I think I can pull it off just fine. "Oh, shut up," she said as her past self was dusting herself off and they heard Isa's shouts. They looked to see that Isa was beating her little fists against his armored chest from where he caught her as they fell. "Let me go, please," she cried fearfully, "you're gonna squeeze me to death." Brooke was surprised by that. The weird old guy hadn't done her any harm. In fact, he was smiling down at her like how a grandfather would to his granddaughter as he said sincerely, "I'm glad to see you're unharmed." But Isa was no struggling to get back to her feet. She finally cried out for him to let go before she jumped back, and away from him. But to their shock, she grabbed Gonfal's fallen lance and pointed it at his neck. "What does she think she's doing?" Frank called out startled as Memory Nami demanded to know the same thing, telling Isa to stop it. "He is our enemy," Isa said firmly, "he's the one responsible for ruthlessly taking away the Shandorians' homeland. So now, I'm gonna take his head." "Take his head," Chopper screamed in horror, trying to run between them and stop her, but his hooves ended up going right through them both. "But what's that going to change?" Brooke croaked out in horror. Robin frowned, already guessing why Isa was acting like this. But as Nami tried to talk to Isa, the only person who didn't show any emotion was the Sky Knight. Gonfal didn't say anything as he looked to her very calmly, as if he had expected this to happen from the start. "I don't get it," Memory Nami said sadly, "how is taking the head of the Sky Knight gonna fix anything? It won't. It's just going to lead to more bloodshed." Chopper yelled anxiously but Robin put her hands on his shoulders. "It's all right," she told him gently. "She's just a child. Remember when Sabo and Ace had talked about killing Luffy when he followed them?" Chopper blinked as he thought back. "Neither one could do it," she answered for him softly. "She had been raised during a war, and must have heard many horrible things. She can't help how she is here. But I don't think we need to worry. He's not just a knight." Isa suddenly said loudly, "He was the leader of the Skypians before Eneru showed up. The Skypians were the ones who drove us Shandorians out of our homes. The Shandorians were driven out of their homes 400 years ago." Memory Nami reminded her quickly, "So there's no way he had anything to do with it." "Yeah, he may look ancient, but there's no way he's that old." Frankie added, "If taking my head would be enough to satisfy your people, I would gladly sacrifice it," Gonfal said, his eyes hidden by his helmet. Everyone, even Isa, seemed surprised by his words as he slowly sat up. His expression was oddly blank as he looked at her, not showing any signs of emotion except for sadness and regret. "Unfortunately," he added grimly, "just my head wouldn't be enough. The level of hostility between the Shandorians and the Skypians hasn't changed, and for good reason. Our ancestors took your homeland away. What a horrifying thing to go through. I don't think I'll ever find a way to apologize for that. Time alone will not heal this wound." They all glanced at each other, knowing that there were some wounds that couldn't be healed. Some scars that ran too deep to ever truly heal. A part of them had hoped that life between the Shandorians and the Skypians had changed since they left, that their war had truly ended once and for all. It is never easy to forgive those who have caused us harm. But for the ones who had been there, remembered that Angel Island had been lost before all this was over. It is never easy to understand the suffering of others unless you experience it yourself. And the Skypians paid for the greed that their ancestors had. Their homeland had been taken away from them. However, unlike the Shandorians, their home was gone, forever. With no chance of ever being returned to them someday. Hopefully, with the end of this war, the hostility between the two sides had calmed. By the time that they left, they had high hopes that they hadn't sunk back into their old grudges. There was still 400 years of anger there. "Therefore I regret my helplessness in this situation," Gonfal said regretfully. "If at all possible, I would like to apologize to the Shandorians who have spent the last 400 years searching for their homes. I would like to apologize to them all, one by one." He slowly looked up to her and said, true sorrow in his tone, "I am truly sorry." Frankie choked on his own tears as he, Brooke, Usopp, and Chopper all got into a group hug and cried at Gonfal's words. "That's so heartbreaking," Usopp sobbed out. "I'm sorry if we gave you such a hard time, weird old guy. He is a real leader." Frankie sobbed as he hugged all three of them with his massive arms. "We get it," Sanji yelled as Isa stood there frozen, still holding up the lance as if she thought that the old man would suddenly attack. Her face now held confusion, and they knew that she didn't know what to think anymore. When she didn't say anything, Memory Nami spoke up in a soft voice. "Listen to him," she pleaded, "he's been trying to make sure that everyone's been getting along. He wants the citizens to live peacefully in the sky. So you really should. We will never be able to get along and live peacefully." Isa cried, "Not with the bad guys. But that's what the Skypians think of them though," Zoro said softly. "That's what war does to people," Robin whispered softly, her eyes full of sadness. "That's just it," Memory Nami said firmly, as if Isa just proved her point, "they're not bad. What's bad is when people can't coexist because they belong to different races." Isa sniffled a little at that as Nami added, "Right. Please listen, Isa-san," Brooke whispered tearfully. "Killing him would only removing one less good man. He's not perfect, but he really does want peace. Though I never met him, I can tell that he's more weary of this war than anyone. Isa just stood there, tears in her eyes. She looked like she didn't know what to believe anymore. But something in her seemed to snap as she screamed out, about to strike Gonfall, who sat there with his eyes closed, as if willing to accept whatever she did. Chopper and Frankie gasped, horrified that she was really going to go through it. Memory Nami screamed at her to stop, but that was when Luffy stepped in. They had been so focused on Gonfall's words that they had almost forgot about him there. But he had stepped up, and stopped Isa from doing something that she was sure to regret by grabbing hold of the top of the lance. They sighed in relief as Isa's eyes snapped open and stared at Luffy. She looked furious as she screamed at him, demanding to know why he stopped her. Luffy didn't even look at her, never relaxing his grip on the weapon. He was apologizing, he said softly, probably not the best time to kill a man. Right you are, Luffy, Sanji agreed with a soft nod. Isa stared at him before she stared at the lance. Her eyes wide as she slowly realized what she had just about done and she began to cry. She fell to her knees, and it was clear to them all that she had no idea what to do anymore. Both Namis looked at her sadly, but very soon, the tunnel was moving again. However, unlike before, they felt themselves falling. They were hovering in midair as their feet left the ground and they could feel themselves as though they were going down in a submarine. Now what? Frankie yelled as they began falling, staring around and tried to figure out what else could possibly be happening. But the others seemed to realize that this was their only chance to escape. Gonfall was back on Pierre as he called that now was their chance to get out of here. Right, yeah, it's now or never. Memory Nami agreed before she called to Luffy and Isa to grab hold of the waiver. No, wait, Usopp yelled hurriedly when he saw Luffy cling onto the jet dial with Isa under his arm. Don't hold onto the dial you idiot. You'll be blown right off. But it was too late. Just like Usopp predicted, when Nami revved up the waiver, the force of the air being blown was easily strong enough to blow them right off. As they fell back with the two, before they lost sight of the old man and Nami, they heard Gonfall screaming out, "Man overboard. We can't leave them. Pierre, go back. You have to save those two." They were soon falling once again, rolling head over heels, bouncing around with such forces that some of the Straw Hats had to fall to their knees and shut their eyes as they fought to keep their lunches inside them. "I think I'm gonna hurl." Usopp yelled over the noise around them, his eyes spinning around violently. "I'm already ahead of you there." Frankie gasped out, his hand over his mouth. "And to think, I've got a stomach of scrap iron. I too am about to lose my lunch. Though I have no stomach." Brook called, "Yo ho ho, oh. Just hold on." Nami yelled over the noise. And after several more turbulent minutes everything calmed around them and the tunnel returned to its dark and quiet self. "How aren't they dead here?" Frankie asked, looking a little green in the face. Usopp and Chopper both fell down, their eyes dizzy as Usopp muttered, "Who cares? As long as we can lie down." "That was one hell of a landing," Sanji muttered, his eye twitching in worry as they spotted Luffy and Isa pulling themselves out of the rubble. "Hey, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing in my book," Zoro shrugged in a bored sort of way. "Wow," Luffy said, "that was one crazy ride if I do say so myself. I think I wanna go again." "I can't believe you actually enjoyed that, Luffy." Chopper yelled out in amazement as he got back to his feet and spun around dizzily, trying to get a hold of himself and stop the room from spinning around. Meanwhile, Isa was screaming at Luffy, "Are you stupid? Why in the world would you hold onto the waiver's jet?" "Sorry," he laughed. For someone who had wanted to get out so badly, he's sure taking the idea of being digested well, Zoro stated. "Look at the bright side," Sanji offered, with a shrug, "there's never a dull moment in this crew." "Huh, that's true," Usopp laughed. "Everyone else managed to escape," she went on angrily, "but we've been left behind because of your stupidity. It's all your fault." "I can't disagree with that," Nami muttered as Luffy just laughed, telling her not to worry. "Get us out of here now," she screamed childishly. And like Nami before her, she hit Luffy when he suggested that they go out of the snake's butthole. "I can see that Nami's already a bad influence on her," Usopp whispered to Frankie in a quiet tone, and he nodded sagely. "What are you two talking about?" Nami asked, noticing the whispering and the shut up at once. Nothing. Nothing at all," Usopp said a little too quickly and she gave them both sharp looks before she turned away. Luckily she didn't think too much about it when they heard a familiar call coming from one end of the tunnel and they looked up to see Pierre was heading towards them. "Oh good," Chopper cried happily, finally able to see straight. "Look, it's the horse," Luffy said in mild surprise. "That's a bird," Isa screamed at him. "Well, she's going to be in for one shock," Brook said calmly as Pierre landed and held up his wing in a salute. Luffy asked, "You telling us to get on your back?" It let out a squawk, as if confirming his words. Brook had also been right about Isa, for when Pierre transformed in front of them, Isa let out a cry of surprise. "How in the world did he do that?" "You never forget meeting your first devil fruit user," Nami muttered, leaning forward to rest her chin on her knees as she watched, a smile tugging at her lips. Luffy just chuckled as he jumped up on Pierre's back, and though it was very subtle, there was no mistaking seeing his arms stretch out. As soon as she saw it, Isa screamed even louder. "You're a freak too." She shrieked, her eyes popping out of her head. Luffy told her about how he ate a devil fruit and he stretched his face out to show her. Freaks. She screamed, the both of you are freaks of nature. I think they freaked her out, Sanji said coolly. Robin smiled sadly, remembering how painful that word had been when she was younger. But she smiled anyway as Luffy said happily, no, I'm a pirate. He then stretched out and grabbed her so that he could pull her up behind him on Pierre's back. She looked freaked out and seemed too stunned to speak. Better hold on tight, okay? He asked as she jerked her head, afraid to say anything as Luffy looked forward. Now, I think it's time we made our escape. And soon they were running, flying along the tunnel. Let's go horse. Full speed ahead and don't stop until you see the sky. Luffy laughed as Isa clung on desperately. The memory faded after that and they all looked around at the familiar trees once again. While that was interesting, can someone mind telling me exactly what happened? Frankie asked, remembering the fall. Because I'm lost. That's a long story, Zoro sighed, running a hand through his green hair in a tired way. Well, I got nowhere to be right now, Frankie said at once. Zoro leaned his back up against a tree and told them that he was eventually about to defeat Ohm and had been trying to get the snake to cough up everyone in its belly. Robin added that while she explored Shandora, she ended up meeting up with Eneru, who explained to her that he was the one who took all the gold from the buildings there. Does that mean he took the bell? Brook asked at once. Thankfully no, Robin answered. When I asked him about it, he was surprised to hear that there was a golden bell. But when he learned about it, he decided to make it his mission to find the bell before he left. That was when he destroyed the clouds where you were fighting above us, she added with a look to Zoro, who nodded in understanding. I wondered how that happened. He said, we were all sent falling and buried under all that rock. And together, they were able to tell them everything that happened while Luffy and Isa were inside the python. They mentioned that Eneru electrocuted the snake, and they had been worried sick that something terrible had happened to them. But from what they saw, apparently the three still inside the snake had no idea to what was going on. That was then when Eneru told the 6 survivors that there was only 3 more minutes before the survival games were over, and since he predicted that there would only be 5 players left, one of them would have to go. And when he asked the remaining survivors who it should be, they unanimously decide Eneru. So he was trying to get you all to fight each other? Brook demanded furiously. Human lives were nothing but playthings to him, Robin answered darkly. That is sick, Brook stated bitterly. But, what was the point? Robin sighed and, her voice starting to grow hoarse from explaining, told them that Eneru explained his plan all along. To destroy Skypia and return the upper yard back to the Blue Sea. He was going to what? Brook and Frankie screamed in horror. That was a horrible thing to see, Nami sighed. I honestly don't know which is worse, Eneru or Crocodile. Okay, now I know that this guy was evil, Frankie muttered if they couldn't figure who was worse. But if Eneru destroyed Skypia, he wouldn't have a place to live. What's the point? Brook called, completely lost. I still don't know what he meant by it, Robin frowned. But what I do know is that he thought that people living in the sky was unnatural. And since he had truly come to believe that he was God, he felt it was his job to keep the natural order. He had come to Skypia for the gold in the upper yard and to take a handful of people to a place he called Fairy Verth. Fairy what? Chopper asked, not getting it. Apparently, from what he said, it's supposed to be a piece of Verth, or Earth, of infinite size, she answered with a shrug. A place he believed that God would reside as opposed to the limited upper yard. He was kidding, right? Sanji asked with a roll of his eyes. I mean, come on. Where in the world would that be? Don't know, and don't care, Zoro said sourly. So long as we don't have to deal with him again. I can live with that, Nami nodded. Robin sighed as she finished explaining that Gonfal demanded to know what Eneru had done to his own divine soldiers that Eneru captured 6 years ago. And that was when he claimed to have killed them all. In a furious rage, Gonfal attacked him, but was defeated. And that was when the guy's ego got even bigger when he found out that he believed his prediction was true, Zoro muttered bitterly. I remember that, Nami sighed miserably. She added on that she watched the whole thing, that she, Wiper, Zoro, Robin, and Eneru were the 5 survivors. But as Eneru began ranting on about destroying the land, Robin reminded him that he couldn't destroy it yet since he was looking for the golden bell. But he then bragged, saying that he knew where the bell was by now and attacked her, claiming that he hated cold, calculating women. You mean that bastard hurt you, Robin? Sanji roared with rage. His eyes were bulging and he was now seething at the thought. Oh, if he had known about that, he would have destroyed the entire insides of that stupid ship before breaking every bone in Eneru's body. I don't remember too much after that, she confessed, her hand going up to her face, to the spot where Eneru had stuck her with lightning. I only remember bits and pieces. I remember, Zoro muttered bitterly, quickly telling them that he had tried to fight with Wiper to defeat Eneru. However, no matter what they did, they couldn't deal a decent hit. Finally, Wiper had an ace up his sleeve. He had a piece of sea prism stone and tried to use it to shut off Eneru's devil fruit powers as well as use his reject dial to kill him. But in the end, he used his ability to restart his heart and come back to life. In the end, he had defeated all of them and Nami added that she had no choice but to go with him, but took the waiver with her so that she could try to escape later on. But before any more questions could be asked, the memory showed up and they all stood up. They were standing among the ruins of breathtaking buildings, though covered up in moss and vines, it was still a gorgeous city to see. Is this? Brooke asked softly. What was once known as the City of Gold? Robin nodded, her feelings of sadness coming when she thought of how Eneru so ruthlessly blasted the ruins to dust. I wish I could have seen this place as it looked before that bastard showed up, Sanji said dreamily. I'm sure that it would have been a sight to see, Usopp said quietly. Imagine it, buildings of gold. But gold or no gold, this is a sight to see. Robin smiled a little as they heard a strange sound behind them. There was the serpent once again. However, this time, it was burnt to a crisp and its jaw suddenly fell open so that 3 figures fell out of it. Luffy crashed to the ground, and Pierre had caught Issa as they fell onto the hard stone. They walked over to the trio as Issa stared around at the ground in amazement. But Luffy only seemed interested in the fact that they had finally escaped. With a scream of joy he took off running, heading up the stairs of a pyramid-like structure that resembled the altar, with Issa right behind him, yelling for him to wait up for her. But he didn't listen as they followed him up the stairs and when they got to the top he screamed out at the top of his lungs, "We're free! We made it out." He finally looked around and added eagerly, "Where are we? What are these old buildings?" Grinning a mile wide he said, "This looks like the place where that golden bell's supposed to be." Well, that's got to be the most sensible thing he's said all day, Nami stated as Issa looked around in amazement as well. What is this place? She whispered, wait, could this be our homeland? Your homeland? Luffy repeated happily, hey not bad, but where'd that big hole come from? At his words, they all looked up to see that there was a large crater not too far away from them. What is that? Chopper asked curiously as Luffy squinted his eyes sharply. As if trying to make something out. The smile quickly faded from his face and was replaced with a serious, almost dreading expression. Luffy-san, Brook asked in concern before Luffy's eyes slowly widened in horror and he jumped down, running towards the hole as if the devil himself was right on his heels. What's wrong? Usopp yelled as everyone suddenly felt a strong sense of dread. As Issa yelled for him to wait, turned back to the stone steps behind her and ran down them to catch up. But the rest of them jumped down to follow Luffy, their hearts pounding so hard that they all suddenly felt sick. No one said anything until they finally reached the hole. What they saw caused some of them to gasp in horror. There they were, Gonfall, Zoro, Wiper, Robin, and Chopper were all laying there on the ground and each one of them was badly hurt. While Memory Chopper looked as if had been slashed to bits, while the others were all burnt black and lay there on the charred ground. This is horrible. Brook croaked out, staring at them all. That Eneru guy had managed to do all this. Luffy ran to Zoro first, picking him up by his shoulders and gave him a shake. Hey Zoro, he said, his voice full of worry, what's wrong with you? Come on, say something. His eyes were wide in anger and panic. How could this have happened to you? How could any of this happen with you here? Current Zoro looked away in shame. So, Luffy trusted him that much that he believed that the others couldn't get hurt so long as he was here, did he? He sighed as his past self lay there, a trail of blood dripping from the side of his face. But Chopper ran over to examine their wounds. They were all serious, he grinded his teeth so hard together that he was surprised that they didn't crack apart. The others were all staring at the scene. They knew that Usopp and Sanji had been dealt with by Eneru as well, but to see the kind of damage that fake god could do, it really showed them. Wiper was able to fight one-on-one with Luffy, and he was now laying at the bottom of the burnt crater. Out of everyone here, he probably was in the worst shape, burnt so black that his face was almost unrecognizable. The others, Zoro, Robin, and Gonfall were each strong, but in the end they were all no match for this guy. This was proof of how dangerous that Eneru truly was. As Luffy tried desperately to wake Zoro up, Pierre and Issa also arrived. Pierre squawked in horror as he ran to Gonfall, also trying to get some kind of response out of him. Luffy was staring around at the others, asking where Nami was when Issa's cry called them. She had jumped down to the bottom of the hole, screaming Wiper's name and begging that he'd wake up. Most of them couldn't believe that any man who was that badly injured could still be alive. As she cried, Luffy gently set Zoro back down and went over to the edge of the hole to see her sobbing over Wiper's broken form, his own blood seeping into the ground. This is horrific, Frankie croaked, unable to think of anything else to say. Though everyone else knew that, they all nodded to what he said as Luffy spoke up, Bazooka Guy was really strong. But even he fell in this fight. Who could possibly have done all this? Issa turned, tears in her eyes as she screamed, it was Eneru. She tried to climb out of the hole again, but she ended up sliding back to the bottom until Luffy stretched out his arm and pulled her out. He's the only one who could do something like this, she whispered in a croak. It was so stupid, Zoro growled, thinking in humiliation at how he was no match for this guy. If only he knew Haki here, he could have dealt with that bastard no problem. Now a part of him was aching to meet up with him once more so that he could make him pay for all this. If they ever met Eneru again, he would show no mercy. Eneru huh? Luffy asked as he set her in front of him and knelt down to her eye level, that god guy. She nodded. My mantra didn't work at all, she said, the whole time we were in the snake. So I have no idea what happened here. But I do know it was Eneru who did this. Maybe, Nami said at once, but the whole time they were in that snake, Eneru had no idea about them as well. Wait, how's that? Chopper asked in surprise. I'm not sure, Nami said softly, but I do know that when Luffy did show up, he took Eneru by complete surprise. Oh, she couldn't wait to see Luffy take that egotistical jerk out again. She was really going to enjoy that. But as they talked, they heard a slight groan and they looked up to see that Memory Robin was moving very slightly. Sanji gasped in horror and ran over to her so quickly that it was like he teleported to her. She was as badly burnt as the others were, but seeing her so badly injured, his shoulders were shaking with suppressed rage. Luffy, he whispered, if you don't take that bastard out for this, I am going to kill you. He roared out with such anger that some of them moved back as fire licked his fire. That bastard, how dare he do this to a lady? Sanji roared out in fury, I don't care if this is all a memory. I'm not going to let him get away with this. Oi, Sanji, calm down, it's alright, Robin's okay here with us. Usopp yelled at him, really? And Luffy did take that guy out. So please, try not to destroy anything. That last part came out in a plea. He had a feeling that part of Sanji's anger was from his lack of cigarettes. He's right, Sanji, Robin answered. It's alright. Sanji gave her a pained expression as Luffy jumped up and ran over to her. He flung himself down to her side as she managed to croak out in a weak whisper, our navigator, she went with him. Nami sighed at that. She hated doing it, she wanted to stay and try to help, but what other choice did she have? If even Zoro and Robin were beaten, what could she do? Luffy's eyes widened as he gently turned her over and held her head in his arms. Just hang in there, he said in a soft tone, it'll be okay. You're saying that Nami was taken away from here by that god guy? Where? I don't know, she croaked back, she seemed barely able to get her words out, but desperate to do so. So looking as if every word was painful to say, she managed to say, listen carefully, if we don't do something soon, Skypia will disappear. What? Luffy asked, it'll disappear. Isa gave a sharp intake of breath. My homeland will be completely gone. Not just this place, Current Robin said quietly as she watched her past self struggle for breath, trying to warn them of what Eneru was planning. Memory Robin looked to Isa with glazed eyes. Everything will fall, she said in hardly more than a whisper as Isa looked as if she had been slapped in the face. He said this nation in the sky was unnatural. He said he'd send it crashing to the ground. How could anyone do that? Brook whispered, shaking his head. He's a soulless bastard, Sanji snarled. He actually believes that he's a god and he uses that as an excuse to destroy everything. Eneru is definitely going after the Golden Bell, Luffy stated firmly and Isa blinked, as if she forgot that he was here, he won't destroy this place until he's found it. Yes, past Robin answered him, and you have to stop him. But you must hurry because there isn't much time left. You can't let Eneru find that bell. But where is it? Brook asked at once. Look behind you, Robin said and they turned. Frankie and Brook were taken aback to see that two enormous, green plants had twisted around each other and up to the skies. So that's the beanstalk you were talking about, Frankie said. Sure they mentioned the thing before, but he couldn't think of ever actually believing that it was this big. Truly a marvel, Brook added, as Isa stood tall, seemingly coming to a choice. Don't worry, she said firmly, I know where they are. There are only two voices left on his island, it has to be Nami and Eneru. Luffy looked at her, his face deadly serious, and that was when they all knew that Luffy set his sights on Eneru. He was going to take this guy out for what he had done here even if it killed him. Isa, he said as he gently lay Robin's head back down on the ground. I need you to take me to them right now. She sniffled a little before she nodded her head. Luffy nodded back before he looked down at Robin. Don't worry, he reassured her as she seemed to be drifting back off to sleep. I'll take care of this god guy. He's going to pay for all this. Once I beat him, I'll come back here for you guys. He then stood up tall as he added, just stay alive for me until then. And he waited around long enough for Isa to climb onto Pierre's back when he turned back into his horse form. Luffy then took off running, all three of them having fierce, determined looks on their faces. They knew the risks that they were facing, but they were willing to do just about anything to put a stop to this madman before took everything away from them. Thankfully, they didn't have to go too far away from them as they ran through the abandoned city. Isa continued to call out directions, and after only a short time, Luffy asked if she was sure they were heading the right way. Yes, we're almost there, she yelled, surety in her tone, I'm sure this is the right way. Frankie punched his fists together eagerly. Oh, I'm going to look forward to seeing this guy get the beating of a lifetime. He's dead meat. Good, Luffy yelled as he kept going, but then they saw Isa's eyes widen a little as she looked to their left. That's it Luffy, she called, pointing wildly in that same direction, and when they looked they could see a cave in the side of the rock face. That hole to your left. Over there. That's it. Then that's where we're going, Luffy declared, and with an extra burst of speed they went running towards the hole. It only took them a few minutes to reach it and bolted down at this dark tunnel. They ended up bursting through into a large room. What they saw made some of them gasp. A ship, one larger than a fleet of battleships put together. The ship was made of solid wood, with lines of oars one either side of it along with multiple rotors and propellers, but what really got their attention was the golden face on top of the ship. So that was all the gold? Brook whispered in astonishment. There was so much of it. What a waste it all went to that guy, Nami sighed grumpily. But suddenly, a figure was standing on the edge of the ship and was glaring down at them. He was tall and muscular and dressed in a very luxurious manner. He was in loose, orange pants with a black pattern on them, and around his waist there was a blue, flowing sash, holding up a light blue veil. He also had golden bracelets on his arms and legs with diamond-shaped gold earrings at the end of his extra long ears that stretched all the way to his chest, and 2 little gold rings around his bigger toes. In his hands he was holding a long golden staff, and he was pointing it angrily down at him as he growled, "How aggravating. There's nothing I hate more than when my predictions turn out wrong." "So," Chopper said quietly, having never actually seen the guy himself, "that's Eneru." "That's him all right," Nami sighed. "How can anyone think that he's a god with ears like that?" Sanji muttered sarcastically under his breath. "I didn't think that they could get that long," Usopp whispered as Luffy stepped forward and took a deep breath. He then screamed out so loud that the whole cave seemed to shake, "Hey! Are you the one they call Eneru?" At the sound of his voice, Memory Nami suddenly appeared at the edge, tears in her eyes as she cried out in relief, "LLLLL LUFFFFFFFYYYYYYY." Sanji saw the whole thing and gave a sharp intact of breath. Damn, why does Luffy get all these heroic scenes? He felt the need to hit Luffy here, but then he remembered his own heroic sacrifice when he climbed on board that ship and helped his Nami to escape. He smiled at that, suddenly feeling better. Meanwhile, Luffy's eyes were narrow and dangerous as he hissed quietly, but still loud enough for them all to hear, "When you mess with friends of mine, then you mess with me. You tell him, Luffy." Usopp cheered, "Now hurry up and beat him." "It certainly took him long enough to get there," Nami stated. Zoro nodded. He noticed that as well. Luffy was almost always thrown into situations like this where he couldn't fight. Like when he was thrown into the water at Arlong Park, or when he was injured at Alabasta, or in this case, stuck in the stomach of a giant snake. But when this happens, the rest of them were to fight the other, weaker servants of the head honcho, so that there wouldn't be anyone left to interrupt the fight. Zoro then smirked to himself, wondering where he came up with that all of a sudden. "Those fools were your friends." Eneru snarled down at him. "You stay right there," Luffy yelled, "I'm coming up there to kick your ass." "Oh, Eneru's gonna love hearing that." Zoro smirked again a little wider. "Mind your tongue, mortal," Eneru called. "You're speaking to God." "Geez," Frankie muttered. "I barely heard him talk here but he's already pissing me off. And I thought that Usopp had a big ego." "Shut up," Usopp yelled at him furiously. "I never called myself a god before, have I?" "I don't know," Sanji teased, "the way you talk about yourself sometimes makes me wonder if you're right in the head. Would you all leave me alone?" Usopp yelled at them as Luffy called up to Eneru. "What makes you god anyway?" Luffy demanded. "Nothing, that's what," Brook yelled as Chopper cheered Luffy on. "I wonder if anyone ever asked Eneru that," Robin offered as she looked to Eneru's surprised face. "I doubt that," Zoro said. He told everyone for so many years that he was a god that he actually believes that. Does he honestly think that he's immortal though? Chopper asked at once. "Again, he just believes that," Sanji muttered, still chewing on the blade of grass, though it wasn't helping him here. "Oh, he's going to be in for a nasty shock when he grows old and fall apart, if he lives that long anyway." Behind them, they could see that Isa and Pierre were hiding in the doorway, looking nervously from Luffy to Eneru. "He's deliberately picking a fight with Eneru," Isa whispered, "Be careful, Luffy." Wait, Luffy. Memory Nami called down in warning, "Watch out for," but she shut up at once when Eneru looked at her. "What were you going to say?" Zoro asked her. She sighed, merely muttering, "I wanted to warn him about his powers. But I see now that I didn't need to worry really." "Why's that?" Brook asked just as Eneru laughed. "I can hear it now, the angels partying," he said, "the citizens must have learned of Skypia's fate." He laughed again, "I wonder how far they can run before the ground gives out beneath them." "What's he babbling about?" Usopp muttered in confusion. Canis somehow found out about what Eneru was planning and went back to Angel Island to warn the people there and to give them time to escape, Robin answered. "It must be around now that she told them, I suppose. But those people never did anything to him." Chopper yelled out angrily, "But he's still going to do it. It's one thing to destroy the island, but to kill everyone there. He truly has no soul to do something so heartless," Brook whispered, his fingers curling over the handle of his can so tightly that you could hear the bones crackling. "I said, what makes you god anyway?" Luffy screamed up and Eneru lost his smirk. "Oh, he's really not going to like that," Robin said knowingly, and Eneru's smile had been replaced with a sour look as Luffy started running up one of the oars, stretching his arm out and swinging up to the upper part of the arc. Eneru looked slightly surprised by seeing his arm stretch and he muttered, I see, you're no ordinary human. Still, you're a mere paramesha type. You can't beat me. That's good for us, Zoro muttered, he's cocky. Yeah, I can't wait to see Luffy do something about that oversized head of his, Sanji muttered with a roll of his eyes. Come on, if this guy's head get any bigger, this ship'll never move. Move? Brook asked, looking at the massive thing. He meant that ship could move. How? They weren't anywhere near water. But then Eneru coated his hand with lightning. Nothing that lives can stand against me. If he believes that, then he should pay a trip to the Blue Sea, Usopp whispered. I think it'd be interesting to see a couple Logia types go against each other, Zoro said, thinking it all over. A fight like that should be sure to go on for a long time. Luffy hurtled himself at him as Eneru answered, that's why, I am God. And he hit Luffy directly with an electrical attack. The blast shook the whole arc, the walls of the cave rattled brutally, and most of the Straw Hats freaked out, thinking for sure that Luffy was going to be burnt to a crisp. But when the attack ended and the smoke created from it faded, they saw that Luffy was standing there unscathed. His lips were sucked in as he stared back at the smoking crater left from the blast before he looked back to Eneru. How'd he do that? Brook gasped out as some of the others looked equally stunned. Robin, Zoro, and Nami were the only ones who were calm as they watched on. Eneru looked surprised for only a moment. I'm impressed you managed to dodge it, he said silkily as Usopp blinked in a startled way. He dodged it, he repeated in surprise, as the memory changed very subtly, so instead of being on the ground, they were all on the deck of the Ark. I could have sworn that he was hit. Brook yelled, thinking that maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him. Not that he had eyes to see with, but he was so tense, he didn't try to make a joke this time. Robin smiled, also realizing what was going on. He was hit. Wait, what? Frankie asked, not getting it. But if he was hit, then why doesn't he look like burnt toast? Wait for it, Nami smiled as Eneru sent an attack of 60 million volts, in the shape of a dragon at Luffy this time. This time there was no doubt that it hit Luffy, however, when it cleared, he was still standing tall. What? Usopp asked before his eyes widened in realization. Now looking baffled, Eneru vanished so suddenly that they thought he disappeared. But it was as if he teleported right to Luffy, his hand right on Luffy's chest as he used an attack of 100 million volts this time, but Luffy wasn't even budging, his body now almost glowing with the electricity flying around him. Of course, Chopper yelled, his eyes wide in excitement, if I thought about it, I have realized it sooner. Lightning can't hurt Luffy, he's made of rubber, awesome. Frankie cheered, excitement was now on everyone's faces as Luffy glared at Eneru. I've had enough of you, he snarled, get off. And here, Luffy practically threw Eneru off him as Memory Nami, along with Isa and Pierre still on the ground, were gapping at him. Eneru was sent back, forcing to do several back flips before he was able to land and get his balance straight. Luffy was still standing where he was, looking ready to fight, but everyone burst out laughing at the look on Eneru's face. There was no trace of smugness or arrogance there, his expression was priceless. His eyes were budging out of his head, his jaw was wide open, as sweat and even snot was falling from his nose as he gapped at Luffy. Zoro smirked, he was especially enjoying this. Not so high in might now as he. With a battle cry, Luffy charged as Eneru shook his head to snap himself out of it, but then their captain kicked the fake god so hard in the stomach that blood and spit burst from Eneru's mouth and his eyes were rolling back. His electrical powers are completely useless. Nami told them as she smiled. Luffy has a rubber body. He's immune to his attacks because they're natural enemies. Truly amazing. Brook laughed happily. My heart would be singing right now if I had a heart. But I don't since I am nothing but bones. Yo-ho-ho-ho. That must have been one heck of a surprise for him, Frankie smirked. Luffy's immune to lighting. He just might be the only person who can battle Eneru without any tricks or help at all, Nami added as Eneru was now choking on his own blood where he lay on the floor. If only that coward didn't resort to such a dirty trick and throw him overboard. Boy, the look on his face, Sanji smirked. That was just too good. One of Luffy's greatest advantages is that people have a bad habit of underestimating him, Zoro nodded knowingly. Usually due to their own arrogance, they take him lightly before they find out the hard way that he's not so easy to take out as everyone else they fought in the past. Rubber, Memory Nami whispered, as her own eyes widened, realizing what it meant. Her voice now filled with renewed hope, she said firmly, go Luffy. Stop him. Eneru slowly got up, staring at Luffy before he jumped back, standing on the railing. You, he gasped, you're no mere mortal. What are you? Mere mortal, get over yourself. Frankie yelled, rolling his eyes. Me? Luffy asked coldly, I'm Luffy. A pirate, and a rubberman. What? Eneru asked, looking confused, rubber. What's wrong with him? Chopper asked wonderingly as Nami pointed to her past self for an answer. I see, she whispered, rubber doesn't exist in Skypia, he doesn't know what it is. Frankie actually started laughing at that as Luffy ran forward. That lightning of yours, he yelled, raising his fist up, won't work on me. Slug him. Usopp cheered, but he got his hopes up a little too high too soon. For Eneru closed his eyes and muttered a single word under his breath. Mantra. Damn, I forgot he could do that, Sanji hissed. This wasn't good. They still had no idea what mantra was here and Luffy had no clue how to bypass it just yet. This was proven true for when Luffy threw out another punch. All Eneru did was sidestep it and Luffy was sent flying by his own attack. Luffy glared back as he stretched out his leg like a whip and tried again. But that was when Eneru disappeared once again, before appearing a little farther back near where past Nami was standing and he tried to use a gum spear on him, but he disappeared again and Nami was forced to duck to avoid getting hit. You dumbass. You almost hit Nami's swan. Sanji screamed in anger. If that idiot had hurt a hair on Nami's head he'd have killed him for it. But Memory Nami didn't seem to care about that, staring in horror as she gasped out, I don't believe it. He really can predict Luffy's moves. I know you guys said that before, present day Nami whispered, but I guess I didn't really want to believe that someone could do something like that. Robin patted her shoulder in a comforting way. Eneru began a beatdown against Luffy at that moment. However, his weapon was blunt and they knew that he wasn't really hurting him as Eneru finally pinned him against the golden face of the arc. Don't push your luck, Eneru sneered at him as Luffy choked. Lightning can cause far more than electric shocks. But I don't have to tell you that, Rubberman. You found out the hard way. Wanna bet? Usopp cheered on as Luffy then grabbed a hold of the golden rod and he smirked at Eneru. You'll have to do better than that. He yelled as he kicked out, but Eneru disappeared and reappeared on the railing once again. I see, Luffy muttered to himself in annoyance, he's got that weird ability that lets him predict my moves. Damn it is right, Sanji muttered, let's hope that Luffy's feeling creative here. Lightning won't work, Eneru muttered thoughtfully to himself, blows won't work, just what is this rubber? He thought it over for a moment. Now hold on, this rubber man, he's a paramesha. Even they have weaknesses. Just like Logia's, Zoro said firmly, thinking of Crocodile. But then Eneru seemed to have a burst of inspiration, and he turned his golden baton into a sharp trident. He used his powers to melt the staff and reshape it into something sharp. Think of it as lightning in solid form. He cried as he jabbed his weapon out at him, but this time Luffy was forced to avoid it. He dodged the attack, getting only slight scratched along the way as he stretched out and managed to jump up to the upper part of the golden face, glaring down at Eneru who laughed, now sounding cocky again. As I thought, slashing attacks are your weakness. Yeah, Luffy admitted as Memory Nami screamed at him not to tell him that. What's the point in trying to hide it? He already knows, Zoro pointed out. That doesn't mean that you have to make it easy for him. She retorted, I mean, couldn't he think of some kind of bluff or? But she stopped and sighed. She knew they were right, and even if Luffy did try to deny it, Eneru never would have believed it. Forget it, she told them, waving her hand in front of her face. It's not important now. Just then, Luffy jumped down, ready to use his Gatling gun, but then Eneru disappeared before he could finish speaking the attack. Stuck in midair, Luffy was staring around wildly, trying to figure out where he went, but then Ice's voice called, Luffy. Behind you. They all turned at her words and what they saw shocked them all. In the golden face, they could see him moving through it, as if he was swimming up through the gold, like some kind of ghost. He can move right through the gold. Memory Nami screamed as he jumped out, his trident in hand as he went for Luffy. Chopper screamed out a warning, but it was too late, and for a horrible moment they thought that Luffy had been impaled by the golden trident when they saw droplets falling from the blade, but as they fell and burned into gold, they realized that it was melted gold, not blood. Looking up, more closely, they saw that Luffy managed to avoid the attack by grabbing hold of the burning gold in his hands. Steam was building up from his hands as he fought back screams. Eneru laughed. You may be immune to lightning, but not to electrical heat it seems. But he got overconfident once again. For Luffy saw his opening, he brought his foot up and used his battle axe to send Eneru smashing down to the deck. Since he was holding onto the trident, the jerk wasn't able to move and went crashing right through the thick wood. Yeah, he hit him. Frankie yelled joyfully as Eneru burst back through the wood again, screaming out insults, his eyes full of anger. He was done playing around. Now Luffy tried to use his Gatling technique to overcome Eneru's mantra, however Eneru had been able to find his real arms and catch his hands, swinging him down so that he crashed into the deck as well. At this rate, they're gonna destroy the whole ship, Brook said at once. I doubt it, Zoro said firmly. This is huge, Frankie said, even for Luffy, it may be difficult to destroy completely. I don't know, Nami said, the arc back on Fishman Island was easily twice, if not 3 times, bigger than this. And apparently Luffy had been able to destroy half of it, didn't he? How did that giant arc stop falling anyway? Frankie frowned as he thought it over. They all looked to each other in confusion as Robin glanced at them all, wondering what she should tell them. But their attention had been drawn back to the fight as Eneru pulled himself out of the wreckage. It's not as though you grew more arms, idiot, he snarled as he walked calmly over to where he threw Luffy, with Memory Nami calling to him worriedly from her hiding place. That's true, Usopp said, thinking it over. Though it may look like it, Luffy just had his 2 fists, his attack just made it look like he had more than 2. Sightseeing on Sky Island, Eneru said as he began to twirl his weapon around like a baton. You Blue Sea people sure picked a bad time to visit. Well, I'll give him that, Usopp whispered as he suddenly fell to his knees. Man, of all the times we could have picked to come to this place. But we were able to put a stop to him and help to end this war. Robin smiled at him on the ground. If we had come just a day later, there wouldn't be anything here and everyone would be dead. Why do you love scaring us, Robin? Usopp whimpered. But as they talked, Zoro realized that she was right. Just what was this? It was like fate had a hand in this and dictated for them to come here just when they were needed. Not only did they arrive when they had to, but Luffy was up against someone whose attacks wouldn't be able to hurt him. Fate was truly a strange thing. I am this land's god, I can do anything my will desires. Eneru proclaimed as he looked up to a hole in the ceiling. I've long dreamed of creating an ideal world. An ideal world? Usopp yelled skeptically. Any world with him ruling is more of a hellish void if you ask me, Sanji muttered bitterly. If he wants to leave so badly, just go. But leave everyone else alone. This dream will become a reality and I won't let anyone stand in my way. Eneru finished, least of all some whelp from the Blue Sea world. He then turned to climb the steps. Where they had just noticed was a golden throne just underneath the face. Now where were we? He asked himself, as if he had just been interrupted in the middle of a thought. Ah yes, how could I forget? We were going to watch this land die. Don't you dare. Chopper yelled at him as Eneru laughed that annoying laugh that made them all angry. Standing in front of the throne, his hands went to two large, golden orbs that were on either of him and used his powers to surge electricity through them. What's he? Usopp began before his answer came at once. Slowly, very slowly, the propellers had started to turn and then spin. With a loud grinding noise, the giant wooden beast beneath them began to move and the ship was actually being lifted off the ground. Brook screamed out in shock. He remembered the first time he experienced flying when they left Thriller Bark and the sun he used a coup de burst. But even then, that was more of a blast-off rather than actual flying. Here, they were slowly being lifted off the ground and heading up to the hole above them. This was actual flying. Frankie felt his jaw drop. He knew that he shouldn't be impressed, but he wanted so badly to see the engine room here. He could only imagine on getting the Sunny to fly like this. They could hear Isa screaming in terror from the ground as Luffy pulled himself out of the rubble that he was smashed right through. But Eneru hardly noticed him as he screamed out at the top of his lungs, his eyes wide with insanity. Behold! Maxim, the ark that shall take me to endless Vearth. To the sacred land without end that I desire. Eneru screamed at the top of his lungs. Rise Maxim, rise. And as if the ship heard his words, they began to rise up and began to hover in the air. How's he doing this? Usopp cried out. If I had to guess, the bastard's using his electrical energy as her main power supply, Frankie said at once. Yeah, Sanji said darkly, I gotta look at her. After me and Usopp woke up, we climbed on board because I saw Nami up there. I decided to take a little detour and do what I could to mess up the engine room. Apparently, there were a couple hundred jet dials used to get the ship to hover. That would explain a lot, Frankie said as he looked to the golden orbs that Eneru continued to pump his powers into. And I can see that he's using the gold as a conductor for his electricity and getting everything to move. Memory Nami seemed close to freaking out as she looked around her wildly. No, this is bad. Luffy, hurry up and stop Eneru. She screamed before she realized what she was saying as giant bits of rock fell around them. They had just hit the ceiling and the whole ship was now trying to force itself through. But wait a minute, Nami cried out, this ark is powered by Eneru, so if he's defeated it'll crash with us on it. But if he's not, then Sky Island's gonna be destroyed. And if we stay here and do nothing, then we'll be taken to some land far away with Eneru. She ranted on before she looked to Luffy. Oh, I don't like our options. No matter what we choose, we still lose. I'd say that your first option would still be the best choice, Zoro said with a shrug. Yes, Nami nodded as she thought it over. I mean, we had a chance to escape if she crashed, but taking off and having to endure Eneru's ego for the rest of my life would have been too much for me. I'll risk death any day. They looked to her, and that really showed how she felt about going with Eneru. After all, the only thing that Nami put before money was her life. The ark was stuck in the earth, struggling to get free as Memory Nami demanded to know what they were going to do, telling him how scared she was. Don't worry, Nami. Sanji yelled out, I'll make sure that nothing harms you while I'm around. Well, I don't see you here yet. She retorted as Luffy stood up, holding onto his hat tightly for a moment before he causally tossed it over to her, and it landed perfectly on her head. Tilting it back so that she could see him, his expression was still composed. Don't be, he said in that calm voice that he only got when things were deadly serious. Calm down. Memory Nami took the hat off and cried out, calm down. But how? Yeah, this doesn't look so good, bro. Frankie added loudly. I'm sure that he can think of something, Brook said confidently. You sail with the crew of the future king of the pirates, Luffy answered her as he finally turned so that they could see his face. There wasn't a trace of fear there as he said with no hesitation in his voice, so wipe that frown off. Right. Memory Nami still looked afraid, but his words seemed to calm her down slightly as Luffy slowly walked up so that he was standing right in front of Eneru, clearly ready for another round. How does he do it? Usopp asked softly, thinking of when Luffy was also able to comfort Vivi after he and Pell caught her. How just a sentence brought hope back to her and she started crying in happiness. That's a good question, Zoro said, thinking it over. I guess he just speaks the truth. How else can you explain it? No one could think of anything to say to that as Eneru repeated, King of the Pirates. Now looking curiously, he walked away from the throne, standing right in front of Luffy as well as he asked, and what domain does he lord over? The King of the Seas. Luffy declared proudly, the greatest king of all. Sunlight suddenly washed onto the dark wood as they neared closer to the bright blue sky. Eneru smirked as he said, so you say, but we'll soon learn if that's true, won't we? Yeah, we sure will. Chopper said without a doubt in his mind. Luffy was going to be the king someday. It wasn't going to be easy, but if there was anyone out there who could do it, it was him. As the two sized each other up, the top of the ship managed to make it through the earth, and the rest was soon following through. Frankie frowned. We're still stuck here, but that's not going to last for too long. He told them, it's only going to be a matter of time before the ship forces itself through. That's not what we should be worried about, Nami told him as Eneru laughed once more, and they were all growing sick of hearing it. But as he laughed, Eneru used the arc maxim to start a process that he called Deathpieya, to form massive thunderclouds. Deathpieya, Brook repeated with a gulp, that can't be good. Believe me, it's a lot of things, but good isn't one of them, Usopp said, remembering with horrible clarity. Just then, out of a chimney on the top of the ark's head, black clouds began to billow out, and in a matter of seconds the darkness began to cover the sky around them. Are those? Memory Nami whispered, but even though it came out as a question, she already knew what they were, she of all people would recognize what they were. At her words, Eneru smirked, that's right, he said, thunderclouds. Using my energy, Deathpieya forces extremely turbulent currents together that produces those lovely thunderclouds billowing out right now. So he's going to grow them big enough until it's strong enough to wipe out the island. Brook asked horrified. Like crocodile sandstorms, he just starts it, but it will continue to grow stronger on its own, Robin said softly. Oh, great. How's Luffy supposed to stop nature? Frankie yelled out in frustration. But then Eneru was bragging once again as he headed back to the throne. Telling them that inside the dark clouds, energy will continue to build until it's reached its peak. Once it was ready to pop, they'll start to release thunderbolts so powerful that they'll destroy everything. Memory Nami stared at him with wide eyes as Eneru decided to show them a demonstration. Holding up just a finger, he sent a single charge of energy to the clouds above them, and to everyone's horror, a large bolt of lightning came out and struck at Angel Island. He's attacking them. Brook cried out in shock. We have to do something. Chopper yelled furiously. That's the point, Zoro gritted his teeth, he's doing this to show off his power, to intimidating Luffy into believing that no one can stop him. Too bad it's not gonna work, Sanji said firmly as Eneru laughed even louder than ever. From the sounds of it, and the sight of the smoke coming from the building, they guessed that the lightning bolt must have hit at least one building. They could only imagine the terror that must have been going through the Skypians' minds. This guy really is a demon, Frankie growled as Memory Nami stared at him in terror. You, she croaked out, her face full of fear, you just proved what a real bastard he is, Sanji hissed. What a shitty asshole. I just teased the angels a little, Eneru said, but after all, that is my right as God. Everyone was infuriated at that, each of them ready to shout out what they really thought about that remark, but Luffy beat them to it. Yelling out in fury, he demanded to know, so being a god, makes it okay to destroy everything. Of course, Eneru said conceitedly, everything here is mine for the taking. He smirked disappeared, as he went on, their land, their lives, speaking of which I'll continue celebrating by taking yours. That was when he tried to attack with his trident. Luffy was able to almost spin over it and kicked out which Eneru blocked it. Now looking annoyed, he jabbed the trident once again, which Luffy had to force it away with his foot, but the heat in it burned the bottom of his foot. So when he jumped away, he was actually jumping around on one foot howling in pain. I thought lightning couldn't hurt him. Brook yelled. He's not using lightning directly, Robin frowned, he's just using it to heat up his weapon enough to burn him. Back and forth, Luffy had been forced to dodge as Eneru continued to try and stab him. At one point, Luffy was forced to grab hold of it to keep it from skewering him. He was so focused on avoiding the blade that he didn't notice his injuries until he looked down at his hands, which were as red as a lobster's, and he was howling in pain. Why does it take him so long to feel anything like that? Sanji whispered. I mean, is his reaction time just really slow sometimes or something? I have no idea, Chopper whispered. But sometimes it's like he can ignore the pain, at least for a brief time. He's so focused on the task at hand that he sometimes doesn't notice what's happening around him. That explains a lot, Nami said. Meanwhile, instinctively, he ducked down, blowing on his burnt hands, as Eneru struck. He missed Luffy's head and the trident managed to burn a hole right through the wood above Luffy's head. Usopp wiped the sweat from his forehead. That was too close. Luffy finished blowing on his hands before he finally looked up in shock at the burnt hole in the wood. He moved back and glared at Eneru, muttering to himself softly, "Damn it, how? How can I beat a guy who can predict my moves?" But then his eyes widened a little as if he had an idea. "He better have something good up his sleeve here," Brook said at once. "Yeah," Luffy called as he got up, "Gum, days." Usopp almost fell over at that. What the hell was that? Luffy's eyes were glazed over and Memory Nami was screaming at him to wake up. Just then, Eneru thrust him with the trident, but Luffy dodged it. Again and again Eneru tried to hit him, but it was like he was a blade of grass in the wind, moving like paper. Eneru wasn't able to even touch him. "How's he doing that?" Chopper asked in amazement. "I see," Zoro said in amusement and Robin smiled. Memory Nami stared as she cried out, "He dodging the attacks unconsciously and just relying on his reflex. He's not thinking, that's why Eneru can't predict his moves." "Awesome." Frankie cheered on. "Yeah, but that's only good for defense," Sanji said at once. He looked to Luffy continuing to sway from side to side. He had learned a long time ago that Luffy's fighting style was freestyle. When he fought it was almost completely improvised. He didn't follow any particular code of honor, except for what he thinks is right. But he had noticed that Luffy can come up with creative counterattacks and unusual techniques to win a fight. Though he's an idiot, since he usually just charges in without any battle plan or knowledge of what he was getting himself into, he suddenly becomes a genius when it comes to fighting. He hoped that he could keep this up. Even with lightning immunity, this guy was still dangerous. Eneru was now growing more and more frustrated. With one last jab, Luffy ended up doing a backflip in the air and landed. As soon as his feet touched the floor, he seemed to wake up. Breathing hard, he muttered to himself, "But if I switch my brain off, then I can't attack him." "Don't stop now," Memory Nami screamed at him. But Luffy's eyes lit up, as if he had come up with another plan. He then did something very strange. Breathing in, like he was going to use his gum balloon, but the air instead inflated his head to enormous size. He held it there for a moment before he exhaled, his limbs suddenly going limp. What does he think he's doing now? Usopp asked with some sweat drop as Memory Nami yelled at him to start acting serious. "I take it you're no fan of my mantra?" Eneru asked suddenly as Luffy's arms and legs looked long and deflated. As he spun his trident around, he went on, "Are you?" "That's to be expected since that's the basis of my power." But as he started to head towards him again, Luffy looked back to the throne and muttered, "That should work." "What should work?" Chopper cried out as Eneru headed to him, but Luffy bounded over towards the golden face. And then, for some reason and to everyone's amazement, he began to attack it with rapid-fire punches and kicks. Gum, fireworks," he screamed out as everything suddenly became a blur and Luffy's limbs were bouncing off the wall. "What?" Memory Nami cried out, "Why attack the Ark?" "Yeah, his enemy is behind him," Frankie yelled. "No." Zoro grinned, "I get it. You're ignoring me and attacking the ship instead." Eneru laughed, obviously sounding like he knew that victory was his. "It's no use. You're even more foolish than you appear." "He may be a fool, but he comes through in the end." Robin smiled as Chopper looked up at her, not understanding it. But the whole time Luffy ignored everything else around him as he just continued to fight harder and harder. Eneru didn't pay him any mind as he charged, getting ready to stab him from the back with his attention focused on the Ark. He laughed cockily until Luffy's fist narrowly missed his cheek. By the time that Eneru realized what was happening, it was too late. "I see," Brook called excitedly as they realized that Eneru couldn't hope to escape. "He's trapped now." Because his limbs were limp, Luffy couldn't predict or control where they will go if they ricochet off of an object, much less Eneru. So even someone with mantra couldn't predict where Luffy's punches and kicks were coming from. And like he was hit with the Gatling attack, over and over at once Eneru was stuck by Luffy's relentless attack. Finally, with blood pouring from his mouth, the fake god was flung backwards and lay there on the deck. Most of the Straw Hats were cheering at that, rooting Luffy on as they heard Memory Nami gasp, understanding coming over her face as she saw the whole scene. "His punches are ricocheting," Robin smiled. "Since your opponent has to be consciously aware of they are doing for hockey to work, this really is the best way to fight. Just don't think about it." Frankie laughed. "Yeah, now finish him off." When Luffy's limbs suddenly came back to life, Luffy spun around and charged at Eneru once again. "I'm not letting you get away again," he screamed as he once again fearlessly, throwing his arms back, and they all knew what was coming. When Eneru got back to his feet, Luffy nailed him right in the stomach. This time, even more blood shot out of Eneru's mouth and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. He fell to the ground once more as Luffy jumped around and began another charge. "This is it." Brook cheered before the current Nami's eyes widened, remembering what was about to happen, and wished she could scream out a warning. Here, Eneru was clearly struggling to get back to his feet as he spit up blood. But finally, they could see real fear in his eyes as he looked up at Luffy, who had just thrown his fist back. Gum. Eneru's eyes widened in terror, his mouth opened in a silent scream, as Luffy finished, "Rifle." "Got him," Frankie yelled triumphantly. He sent Eneru crashing into the side of the golden face. But at that moment the ark finally broke free of the ground and rose up into the air, with rubble falling everywhere, the trees breaking apart as they shot up. It worked. Memory Nami gasped out as she beamed at Luffy, "You did it." Eneru's down. But then she realized that they were still flying, but, wait. The ship's taking off. You guys aren't that high up though. Brook pointed out, so you can still jump off, right? No, Nami told him as they heard a loud slapping sound and they looked up to see that Eneru was starting to get up to his feet. You've got to be kidding me. Frankie yelled. The bastard's tougher than he looked. Sanji hissed as Memory Nami looked ready to start crying as she backed away. With blood dripping from his face, he hissed, "You fools, is that the best you can do?" He demanded before he looked at Luffy with a dark look in his eyes. "Make no mistake, boy," he snarled, as he gasped for breath, "when you're gone, the world will be mine. Just give up on your stupid plan already." Zoro called in annoyance. "It's never gonna work. Come on, Luffy." Chopper cried out, with the ark now starting to clear the treetops. And once again, Eneru went on started to get back to his feet. "Everyone will fear me, worship me, and revere me. I am all-powerful. In this world, filth like you must learn the only truth. By my hand, nothing is ever impossible. For I am the Almighty God. For crying out loud, can't someone shut this guy up?" Sanji yelled, his hands now gripping his hair tightly, feeling close to screaming out in frustration. "For the 100th time, you aren't a god. Deal with it. Luffy, please get rid of him already," Zoro agreed, shaking his head. The ship was now skimming over the tops of the trees. The dark cloud that the ship was creating was growing bigger and darker with every second. "Skypia will be destroyed, the angels' lives finished," Eneru went on in a determined voice. But they could hear the slight anxiety in his tone. "No one can stop me." His hand was suddenly covered with electricity, "Not even you." Luffy realized that he was trying something and he charged, ready to finally end this fight. "Wanna bet?" The golden wall. Memory Nami gasped as Eneru placed his hand to the gold behind him and melted it like butter, swirling it around him until he was able to form a giant golden ball that Luffy tried to punch through. "No!" Usopp screamed out, not knowing about this. The gold closed around Luffy's arm and he screamed in agony as he fell, screaming that it burned. "That's gonna leave a mark." Sanji yelled, biting his lip. "So that's how he got that ball," Robin said as Luffy was struggling to get it off, but the gold had already cooled into a large ball. They could see where his arm was. It was burning and turning red as steam wafted out. "It's melting his arm." Brook screamed in panic. "How did you guys get that off him?" Frankie asked, sounding stunned. "Damn, just when I thought that this was over. That ball was more trouble than it was worth," Nami said softly, "but it did come in handy in the end." "Handy? He can hardly move with that thing stuck on his arm," Sanji pointed out. "You'll see," Nami said firmly as Eneru started to mock Luffy, saying that he now evened the odds, that he had taken the fight right out of him. "Yeah, right," Usopp said firmly, "believe me, God, it's gonna take a lot more than that to stop him. Believe me, I know, I've tried countless times to stop him from doing something stupid. Besides, this fight wasn't even from the start," Nami added angrily. Luffy was still struggling to get the ball off as Eneru wiped some blood from his face. "You see, I'm honestly not sure I can take another hit from you." He walked over to him. "Therefore, I think it's best if we sever ties. But in honor of the spirited efforts you put forth," he put his foot on the golden ball and said, "Take this golden barbule as a parting gift." "He didn't," Brook yelled out angrily. "He did," Nami nodded as Eneru kicked the ball over the side of the ship, and now Luffy was struggling to stay upright. But the weight of the ball was steadily forcing him back as he held on desperately. "It's too heavy. Gold can easily be heavier than stone. Especially with that much," Robin said worriedly. "Even with his strength, he'd never be able to lift it up like this." Memory Nami was crying out Luffy's name frantically as Eneru's face was self-assured that this threat was going to be gone once and for all. His lips curled into a deadly smirk as he said, "This world will be mine again. Just as it was before, and not a soul in the world can defeat me." "Not a soul in the world," Luffy repeated with a harsh laugh, and Eneru's smirk disappeared. "You're an idiot," he said firmly. "Even if I can't defeat you," his face smirked, "back in the blue sea there are a ton more fighters who can put you in your place. And if even Luffy can figure that out, then you know this jerk's dumb," Sanji said with a firm nod. "Someone like you could never," Luffy began, but he didn't get a chance to finish for Eneru teleported to him, and with him in this shame, there was nothing that Luffy could do to protect him. "You talk too much, boy," he said, back to sounding arrogant, despite the damage that Luffy had done to him. He jabbed his staff to the wood that Luffy was holding onto and it broke apart. "Now fall. Fall with the Sky Island." "No," Chopper and Brook screamed as the side of the ark crumbled. But Luffy was able to scream out one last threat before he fell, "You won't win." But the weight of the gold was finally too much for him as he fell, Memory Nami's voice screaming in their ears. "Eneru," Luffy screamed as he fell, "fight me, you coward. That bastard'll pay for this." Frankie yelled furiously. But as they watched Luffy fall, Isa and Pierre, in his Pegasus form, appeared and were flying towards him, with Isa screaming that they were going to save him. But past Nami's voice called out in warning, Isa. Pierre, he's gonna shoot you. No don't. Chopper yelled it in shock. Isa was just a little girl. Luffy's voice screamed out in rage and the last thing that they saw was Eneru creating that pillar of destruction and fired it. The memory then faded, all of them feeling fear and anger at what they just saw. They waiting impatiently for the memory to return and so they could see how they got out of that mess. After a few agonizing minutes, they were back in the cave that they had been in before. However, most of it had been destroyed with the arc had broken free. They stared around at the damaged cave until they heard crying. They looked up to find that Isa was on top of Pierre, trying to wake him up. Horsey bird, she cried, Horsey bird, I'm sorry. You were trying to protect me. How bad is he, Chopper-san? Brook asked. He must have gotten hit pretty hard, Chopper said, for the millionth time, wishing that he could do something to help. I just can't tell from here. But as she kept shaking him, they heard Luffy's voice calling out Isa's name through the wreckage. They followed the way and they soon found Luffy's head stuck in the ground and the golden ball still stuck on his arm. How did you land like that? Isa cried when she found him. How does he always get his head caught in something? Nami asked, falling to her knees, suddenly exhausted. There was no way that fall could have killed him, Usopp said with a firm nod. But I thought that gold ball would have been smashed. Not quiet, Robin answered, it's going to take a massive impact to break that thing off. That fall wasn't going to do it. Instead of waiting for an answer, Isa went to Luffy's side and helped to pull his head free from the ground. Once his head popped out, he tried to get back up, but was struggling underneath the weight of the ball as he raised it up over his head. He had been able to break stone and crush trees with his bare hands, so seeing him struggling for breath as he tried to pull it off showed just how heavy it was. Alright, he said, before he realized that he was truly stuck. Damn it, I can't get this golden ball off. Hey, what your mouth? Isa snapped at him as he looked up. They glanced up as well, and they couldn't see a trace of the ship here. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Luffy made up his mind. Let's just get back to that beanstalk where Robin was, he gasped to her, I won't let Eneru get away with this. Isa nodded as she went back to Pierre and Luffy looked up to the sky once again. Nice try jerk, he snarled, but it takes a lot more than that to stop me. Your arc's toast, and I know just where to find you. The memory faded and Frankie let out a loud groan of annoyance. He was dying to know what happened. How did you escape, Nami-san? Brook asked her at once. Because I don't think that he let you go that easily. Nami laughed nervously. I tried to fight him. You did what? Chopper cried in shock. It wasn't much, she said hurriedly. I mean, I was able to use the Climax Thunder Balls to deflect some of his weaker attacks but that was about it. She jerked her thumb to Sanji and Usopp and added, these guys were the ones who saved me. And I couldn't be happier. Nami my love. Sanji swooned, looking red to hug her, but she stopped him just by putting a finger to his head and he froze, but his face never lost the love-struck look. But how'd you guys get up there? Robin asked in surprise. Unless you suddenly knew how to fly. Not a bad guess, Usopp whispered darkly as he told them that Sanji dragged him out of bed and off through the forest. He then used the Usopp to grapple up to the ship and they climbed on board. As Sanji worked below wreaking the engine room, Usopp found Nami and distracted Eneru while she got the waiver and prepared them to jump off, aiming for the patch of island clouds around the beanstalk. That had to be one of your bravest moments, Nami smiled at him and he grinned at her before she looked to Sanji. And then what you did was insane. What did you do, Sanji? Chopper asked. I just thought if I had to go, then I couldn't think of a better way than to protect a beautiful lady, he said in a cool voice. And Nami told them that after Eneru ended up hurting Usopp again, Sanji got in the way, protecting them and taking the full attack head-on while giving them time to escape. You did that? Brook asked in amazement. Yeah, but I never did figure out how I got back on the ground. Sanji asked himself. That's because Usopp here used some more of his gadgets to climb up the ship again before he jumped off with you, Nami said, clapping a hand on Usopp's shoulder and he laughed nervously. You did that for me? Sanji asked impressed, looks like you do have guts after all. Hey, can't you be a little more grateful? Usopp demanded angrily as Sanji laughed. I'm kidding, he smiled, thanks Usopp. So touching how far you all will go to protect each other, Frankie sniffled. Man, I love you guys, makes me wish that we met sooner. Of course we didn't met under the best of circumstances, Zoro pointed out and Frankie stopped crying. Right, he muttered grimly, we'll be seeing that again won't we? What are you talking? Brook began, but the memory had just returned and they looked up to see that they were back in the ruins of Shandora. Luffy, Isa, and Pierre were running behind them, with Luffy being forced to drag the gold ball behind him as Isa was dragging Pierre by his beak. The ball was so heavy that Luffy was often sent smashing straight into buildings with Isa screaming at him to stop destroying her homeland, pointing to where Giant Jack was. I'm sure he's trying to go that way, Usopp whispered with a little sweat drop as they watched Luffy pulling himself back out of a broken building, only for the ball to drag him back and smash into another wall. Damn that Eneru, Frankie muttered angrily, I still don't get how you can think of having that weight on his arm as a good thing. I'm sure you'll see soon. Nami smiled as Luffy heaved himself out of the wall and back down the path. With only minimal damage done to the city, they were finally able to make it back to the base of Giant Jack, staring around when they got back to the giant hole where the others were. But, to their surprise, when they arrived, they discovered that Robin and the boys were gone. What happened? Brook asked worriedly. Nothing happened to you all, did it? No, Robin answered, looking back at him. I was able to recover enough to get everyone out of the city and up to that first level of clouds above us. I knew that staying here was only going to put us all in danger. Thank goodness, Chopper sighed in relief, mostly glad that Robin was able to heal on her own without his help. Aw man, Robin and the others are gone, Luffy said, glancing around worriedly, and Zoro and Chopper. And Wiper and Gonfall, Isa added miserably, who had just caught up with him, still holding onto Pierre's beak. Well, where the heck did everybody go? Luffy asked anxiously, and Isa lowered her head slightly so that they couldn't see her eyes that were shadowed over by her hat. She muttered that they must have already climbed up the beanstalk already. Luffy looked up at it and nodded, agreeing that Robin must have helped them and that they should go as well. He turned and began to head towards the vine as well, at least until they all noticed that Isa had moved from where she stood at the hole. Is she okay? Chopper asked worriedly as Robin looked sadly at the scorched earth and pitch-black hole. It was almost as if they were getting a glimpse of what was to come if Eneru had won. Maybe Isa was thinking along the same lines if she kept starting at it. She was shaking very slightly as Luffy called to her. Hey, Luffy, she asked in a choked-up voice, and when he asked her what was wrong, she looked at him, tears falling from her eyes, truly looking scared. She asked, will the Sky Islands really be destroyed? Luffy just looked at her tears, his face betraying no emotion before he walked over to her and hauled her and Pierre onto his back. Luffy, she asked worriedly as he turned back to the beanstalk. Luffy just looked on with a determination shining in his eyes. I won't, he began with no trace of doubt in his mind, let that happen. Isa's eyes widened at that as he took a deep breath, and as he ran on, they heard him screaming out, I won't let Eneru get away with this. You said it. Frankie cheered as they bolted after him. No one messes with our friends and gets away with it. Show him he's not so tough after all. Usopp added as they made it to the foot of the vine, and with a deep breath, Luffy began to climb right up it. Riding up on their imaginary elevator up and up, they were able to watch as Luffy went bursting through the thick clouds to the upper levels. The first thing they saw was that the blue sky was now being blocked by the black clouds. They watched as Isa looked around and she screamed at Luffy to stop and look. They all did as she said, and they spotted Memory Robin standing on her feet, with the others lying around her feet. She looked a great deal better than she had been before, but still not fully healed as Luffy got her attention, calling her name before he threw Isa and Pierre at her. Oh, Robin dear, I'm so glad to see that you're alright. Sanji swooned happily. I was feeling a lot better after some rest, she said, though it wasn't completely true. She knew that she was far from okay even at this point. But they didn't need to know that, did they? As Luffy threw the two at her, Robin's past self created a kind of net with her powers to catch them. After they were safe on the ground, Isa screamed at seeing Robin's powers before Robin looked back up at Luffy, asking what he had on his arm. How did he get rid of it? Usopp asked. Because when I next saw him, he didn't have it. He didn't. Brook asked as Nami sighed regretfully. That load of gold would have been worth a fortune, but then again, even if they did take it with them, knowing Luffy, he probably would have sunk the Mary with it. Then how did he get it off? When he took out Eneru, she answered with a smile as Luffy yelled down at Robin, ignoring her question. Robin, he called, the golden bell's at the top of this vine, right? And Eneru's trying to get his hands on it, isn't he? That's right, she called back knowingly, if the Grand Belfry exists, then it would be there. But he's already. But Luffy didn't stick around, that was all he needed to hear as he began to climb, ignoring Robin's calls. Up and up he ran up the vine, shouting out, you better not think for a second I'm gonna let you get away with this, Eneru. I'll never let you have the golden bell. As much as I agree with him, Usopp yelled as they continued to glide up beside him, but, he looked up to the sky to see how dark it had become. The thick thunderclouds was covering the entire sky by this point, and it was looking more dangerous with every second. Yeah, unless he does something, and fast, I don't like to think at how this is going to end, Brook muttered, feeling real fear here. But they couldn't do anything but continue to follow after Luffy as they spotted the ark far above them, somewhere close to the top of the stalk. Yeah, he found him, Sanji said before frowned anxiously. They burst through a second level of island clouds, and they found themselves among the wreckage of burnt buildings and scorch marks that they recognized at once as Eneru's work. I think that this was what they called God's Shrine, Robin said, thinking back to what she learned about this island before they left. This was where God was supposed to live, overlooking the rest of the upper yard. I guess they would, Zoro stated as he looked. And I'm guessing that once he learned that his precious ark was done, he didn't need this place anymore and took care of it personally, Sanji added, feeling a bitter taste in his mouth. Why are you surprised, crap cook? Zoro asked sourly. Shut up, mosshead, if you don't want to die, Sanji growled back as Luffy had stopped to catch his breath. Lugging that ball around was clearly taking a toll on his stamina. But that wasn't stopping him as he tried to go straight up the rest of the vine. But Eneru must have spotted him, for more bolts of lightning were suddenly sent flying down at them, with Usopp, Brook, and Chopper all ducking, forgetting that they couldn't be harmed in this place. Thankfully, Luffy was able to avoid it. However, Eneru's attack ended up breaking off the very top of the plant, causing half the plant to crumble and fall. So that's how that thing fell, Zoro said, vaguely recalling seeing that plant fall and almost crush him. He should have known that Eneru was behind that. Luffy managed to save himself by grabbing onto the stem of a leaf and held on tightly. Great going, Luffy. How are you going to get back up? Sanji yelled out. But things were getting worse all around them. From what they could see in the distance, more lightning was falling around Angel Island like rain, and the clouds seemed to part directly above the landmass as if the sun could be seen. Why do I not like where this is going? Frankie asked with a gulp, suddenly having a very strong feeling that he doesn't want to see where that light was coming from. Nami was shaking slightly, not sure if she wanted to see this all over again. It was horrible enough to see it the first time, she wasn't sure if she could stand to see it once again. But Luffy was still going. Unable to pull himself up, he was moving up and down to try and get the ball to act like a yo-yo, to be able to use the force to swing him back up to the clouds above them. It was rather clever, and by the time the weight finally broke off the giant leaf, the force truly did send them rocketing back up and he landed with a crash on the soft clouds. Clever, but I doubt that's gonna be able to get him up all the way there. Sanji muttered as he glanced up with disdain at the arc. Yeah, how did he get up there? Chopper asked, trying hard to remember. Wait for it, Nami muttered as Luffy began to pull himself up. Just then, her memory self had come bursting out of the clouds as well and ended up crashing on top of him. Wow, how did you get there? Brook asked, impressed. After Sanji and Usopp rescued me, we went to the base of the vine and that was where we found the others, Nami answered quickly as her past self looked down in surprise to see Luffy laying there. Robin told me that he went up there and I followed after him to try to stop him and so that we could escape. Of course the idiot had other plans. Luffy's squashed face turned around to look at her in great surprise. What are you doing here, Nami? I haven't rescued you yet. I came to rescue you, you dolt. She said loudly, Sanji and Usopp saved me so I was safe down below this whole time. Really? You were? That's great. I was worried, he said with a smile. Moron, Nami said, but she was smiling as she watched. More importantly, her past self muttered, looking ready to drag him from here if that's what it took. But before she could finish saying anything, they heard a deep rumble echoing through the air around them and suddenly they were all looking around quickly, trying to make out where it was coming and just what was it. This can't be good, Brook whimpered. Look, Frankie yelled, pointing dramatically, and they looked in time to see what that foreboding light had been. The thunderclouds. Memory, Nami said seriously, they're changing shape. And there it was, through the clouds came another, a pitch-black thundercloud, as round as a ball and one so large that it was easily as big, if not bigger, than the entire Angel Island. It was hovering right over said island and was shooting off lightning around it. Reigo, Usopp whispered in horror. Right, what? Frankie choked out, his entire body shaking at the destruction overhead. I've got a bad feeling about this. Memory, Nami cried out. That ball over there is a massive thunderhead. And it's bursting at the seams with hurricane winds and deadly lightning bolts. It's right above Angel Island. Chopper yelled, glad that he didn't remember this. Unreal, it's like a nightmare. Brook added in terror. None of them was able to say anything else as they could only watch on. And that was when the black sphere fell from the sky. It seemed to take an age to fall. But what happened next happened so quickly that it was as if they were dreaming. The black cloud landed on the top of the island and the explosion was so great that everything was bathed in a blinding light. Though it was miles away, they could still feel the wind. The shockwave that had been created almost blew them back despite the fact that they shouldn't have been able to feel it. The sound was deafening and the entire sky was filled with black smoke. They watched in horror as the smoke began to clear and the lightning continued to fall, but when it did, they were left with a devastating sight. Where Angel Island once stood, was now nothing but a large, black hole. The entire island had been completely obliterated. No one said anything as they stared in horror at what just happened. It's gone, Brook croaked out, falling to his knees. Angel Island is gone. He blew it all away. Usopp whimpered, this is worse than the first time. Wait, Frankie gasped out, his eyes twitching a little as he asked, didn't you say that girl Canis warned the people? Most of the citizens were able to escape, Robin said softly, but I don't know if everyone managed it. Evil doesn't even begin to describe this guy, Zoro hisses as he looked up to the sky to see the ark still there. How could someone do all this and actually believe that this was their right? God or no God, that guy was insane. Finally having enough of this, Memory Nami was screaming at Luffy to hurry and get on the waiver so that they could get back to the Merry and escape. But Luffy had his back turned to them all as she continued to plead. Without looking at her, he merely said 2 words, I can't. What's he going on about now? Frankie asked at once, I think now is a good time to make like a banana and split. He can't, Zoro said firmly, even though Nami's safe, he won't stop. But, Brook whispered before he realized what he was talking about. Meanwhile, Memory Nami was demanding to know why he couldn't leave when there was nothing stopping them. I don't have to save you anymore, he said, sounding just like what Zoro had just said. But, I still have some unfinished business. Unfinished business? What's left to do here? She screamed at him. Are you trying to get back at Eneru? That golden bell is somewhere up there in the sky. He yelled back as he glared above them once again. You mean? Frankie said, his jaw falling open as Memory Nami stared at him. You're after the bell, she asked before she got angry, and then she began to yell at him, Luffy. Your life is more important than gold. Though no one said anything to Nami about that, but that really proved how much she cared about her crewmates. She'd take them over any amount of treasure any day. What? She asked as they looked at them when she noticed that they were looking at her. Nothing at all, Robin answered with a smile. But Memory Nami went on loudly, look at that. Even if the lightning doesn't hurt you, he can still destroy you 1,000 other ways. If it's gold you want, you've got a load of it on your arm. So give up the bell, Luffy, for your own sake. I won't die, he said firmly, and she was now looking frustrated, looking ready to argue, but he shouted over her, you saw it right. Saw what? Sanji asked. He'd never understand that rubber-brained captain even if he sailed with him for another 100 years. Nami looked startled as she asked what he was talking about. He finally turned to look at her and asked, the City of Gold. You know for a fact that it exists, right? She looked at him as he went on loudly, then it wasn't a lie. Old-timer's ancestor. He wasn't a liar. I have to let Old-timer and the others down below know that the City of Gold is up in the sky. He's gonna make sure that bell rings, Zoro nodded, and he's not going to leave until he does. I can't wait to hear it again, Usopp said, just thinking about that wonderful sound sent chills up his spine. Memory Nami stared at him as he explained, if I ring that bell, then they should be able to hear it. Otherwise, Old-timer and his monkey pals will keep searching the ocean floor until the day they die. Frankie's lip quivered at that, tears were forming fast as he thought about it. He's doing all this for that old guy and the monkeys. Aw man, Luffy, just when I thought you couldn't get any cooler. Ring that bell. Chopper cheered on. Luffy, Memory Nami said softly, but there was understanding in her voice. She fully understood why Luffy was doing what he was doing, and there was now no point in trying to stop him now. Eneru won't take the golden bell, Luffy declared. The sound from a bell that huge will be heard far and wide by people everywhere. So I'm not stopping until I heard the sounds of the golden bell. The memory faded and they were all left in stunned amazement. It was one thing to sit below and watch him beat Eneru, but to hear from his own mouth why he was doing what he was doing, why he refused to stop, it truly put it all into a new light. Despite seeing how far Eneru was willing to go, he was going to stay and see Thing Whole Madness through until the end. All to clear the name of a man he never met. The next memory reappeared and Luffy was gasping for air, glaring up at the beanstalk with the waver right next to him as Memory Nami was leaning dangerously over the side of the clouds to look below them. Robin glanced up to see that the ark had stopped by a cloud to the west and her eyes narrowed. Eneru's ship isn't moving from that cloud. Which can only mean one thing. He found the bell. Brook said angrily, but how are you going to get up there? With a little luck, Nami said with a smirk as her past self ran over to the leaf the size of a rowboat that Luffy broke off before. She heaved it up a little ways and grabbed a piece of charred wood from one of the destroyed buildings and quickly wrote something on it. Cut down this beanstalk and make sure it falls, and after that she drew a compass rose and circled the W for the west before she pushed it over the edge. What are you doing? Brook asked her. Sending everyone below us a message, she said with a nod. Because there was only one way to get to Eneru's ship and we needed help. They had to cut down Giant Jack. Cut down the beanstalk, Frankie repeated, sounding lost. What's the point in doing that? But as she began to answer, another Rago had started to form above them, and this one was even bigger than the last. That thing is back, Brook screamed as Chopper cried in terror. Damn you Eneru, Sanji snarled. It's even bigger than his last one. Luffy yelled up furiously, that bastard. Now that he's got his grubby hands on the golden bell he has no more use for Skypia. Memory Nami declared. And I thought that you still had some time. Chopper yelled out fearfully as Nami's past self said angrily, that creep's pretty easy to figure out. She then looked to Luffy and yelled at him, as if it was his fault that he wasn't taking care of Eneru already. Well, don't just stand there, Luffy. We can't let him get away with this. Luffy looked to her in surprise and asked her what happened to her plan on escaping. She looked away as she said, yeah well, I can't leave now with what's at stake. Besides, you wanna ring that golden bell, right? I gotta. For Old-timer, Luffy decided. I knew that I had to do something to help him out, Current Nami told them. Otherwise we were all going to be killed before he got up there. He might have been able to survive that Rago, but we wouldn't be so lucky. Hard to believe that anyone can survive that thing, Zoro said, looking up at the sky at the ever-growing black sphere. Memory Nami knelt at the waver, quickly checking it before she told him that he can't drive the waver with his arm like that. But she could drive it and she'd get them up there. But as she stood back up, she gave him a deadly serious look before she said, "Listen, you gotta promise me you'll get us out of this mess in one piece, okay?" "Yeah, you got it, and thanks," Luffy said firmly as they both looked up at the beanstalk. Neither one said anything as they stood there, simply waiting. Everyone was growing impatient, all of them dying to see what was to happen next. All of them wondering what was going to happen from this moment on. "Let me see if I got this straight," Frankie asked them once Nami quickly informed them of her plan. "You mean that your plan was to ride up the side of the falling beanstalk and jump to the ark?" "Pretty much," Nami shrugged. "It didn't go exactly as planned, but it worked out in the end." "Well, I always knew that you were crazy," Frankie sighed, "but I can't wait to see this." That maniac was about to wipe this land away and they were the only people who could reach him in time to stop him before he set that thing off, Zoro reminded him. "Besides, I was so sick of this guy." "We all were," Robin nodded. They waited for another agonizing wait. Every once in a while they would feel the vine tremble, and they knew that they were trying to take down the stalk. Even though they knew that this plan worked, they couldn't help but wonder what was taking so long. The stalk would quiver and sometimes shake. Once they could feel it sliding off and they thought for sure that it was falling, but then it stopped. "I forgot how tough that thing was," Usopp grumbled. "It was a plant but it was harder than stone. It took a whole team to bring it down. But you got it down in the end." Robin smiled as, finally, the stalk was falling once more and they knew that it wasn't going to stop falling this time. Memory Nami revved the waver up. "This is it," she cried, "get on Luffy." He got on behind her, gripping her by the waist, which Sanji whimpered in jealously, as he directed, "Gun it. Go." Past Nami smirked at the order. "I should mention, I've never revved this waver's jet dial up to maximum power before. I was a little scared to see how fast it would go. I guess we're about to find out if it'll be too strong for me to control, huh?" "No better way to find out," Zoro shrugged. "What would you have done if it was too strong?" Robin asked her curiously. "Die probably," she shrugged. "Thankfully, I was able to control it, though barely. It took everything she had to hang on and keep it from going out of control. One little slip up and it would have been over." "Go for it, Nami," Luffy said, a trace of a grin on his own face as she revved it up. And like a shot they were off. Memory Nami screamed at him to hang on tight as they hit the beanstalk and soon they were watching them ride up the side of the plant as it began to fall. Eneru noticed them and began to shoot more shots of energy at him, but Luffy taunted him. That shot was pathetic. "Now is not the time to taunt the guy, Luffy," Usopp yelled fearfully. For once, Sanji was on his side, knowing that his sweet Nami could have been seriously hurt here if one of those stupid attacks hit. But Memory Nami figured out what Eneru was trying to do as the lightning continued to fall. "That creep. He's trying to destroy the base of the beanstalk." Luffy screamed at her to do something, but there was nothing they could do at this point. It was taking all they had to just keep going. They were too high up and going too fast. If the foundation was destroyed, the stalk would crash before they could reach the ship. Some of the Straw Hats were now screaming out encouragement so loud that they were hurting their own ears. But even as the shots that were aimed at them, Luffy was able to deflect the stray with his own body. They were in real trouble, but they kept going up with the stalk never slowing down as it began to topple. "You know," Memory Nami cried as they tried to avoid the bolts, "I think he's trying to make sure you don't get near him again." "That just proves that he's afraid," Zoro said firmly as Luffy declared that it was too bad and that he was going to take him out. The lightning around them were continuing to destroy the base of the stalk, and Robin looked down sadly at the ruins that were being destroyed. But she kept her attention on what was happening in front of her. Just then, they watched as the waver finally reached the top and were launched right off into the air. "Here I come, Eneru," Luffy shouted out as they flew. "Yeah," Frankie yelled as Chopper jumped up and down with amazement. "Take that bastard out. And hurry up already," Sanji added. "Give back the golden bell," Luffy yelled as they went soaring up. "Right now." "That's enough," Eneru shouted over noise from his precious Reigo was making. "It's ready." He raised his arms to his sphere of death. "Now disappear along with this land. He's gonna throw it down on us," Chopper yelled, his eyes wide and terrified as he clung tightly onto Usopp, who hugged him back as Luffy growled angrily. But as the black sphere started to slowly fall as well, Luffy said something to Nami. "Thanks, for your help." She turned to stare at him as he cried out, jumping off the waver, and throwing her right off balance so that she was sent falling onto a cloud. "It won't be, for nothing. I thought for sure that he was a goner here," Nami sighed as her past self screamed to him to wait as she landed on the cushioned fall. "I really wish that he warned me before he did things like this. But what can he do about it now?" Brook yelled, "He's not going for the ark." "He's going to." But he stopped, his voice fading away as he realized where he was going. "No, don't do it please," Memory Nami screamed out as her eyes widened in horror. "The air currents and lightning discharges in there could kill even you." "Really?" Frankie screamed as Eneru continued to laugh and mock Luffy. "What can you do against this kind of power, man of rubber?" he demanded as he roared with even more laughter. With a battle cry, Luffy flew straight towards the Reigo and went right through it. "He's inside that thing," Sanji yelled out, the grass falling from his mouth. "But what can he do from inside that?" Chopper screamed out. That's where the golden ball comes in handy, Nami told them as they heard a familiar voice screaming from inside the sphere. Gum gum. Fireworks, golden baton. And that's when the sphere started going off. Hundreds of bolts were flashing and exploding in all directions. It was as if the power inside that ball was blasting and that power was being released. They could see that the lightning was becoming volatile and unstable. What the hell is going on in there? Sanji screamed out as it began to get worse. I see, Robin said, her eyes widening a little. That gold ball on his arm is a natural conductor. He's using it to discharge the Reigo before Eneru drops it. Can he really do all that? Brook cried out. Seeing how it worked, yes, she answered. Damn, how'd he know that would work though? Sanji yelled out. But then Luffy's voice was coming through, calling above the noise of the thunder and chaos. You with your thunder and lightning. His voice echoed throughout the sphere. We made it all the way to Sky Island and you had to come along and ruin the weather, you electrical freak. That's what he's upset about. Usopp yelled out. But then he stopped as he saw it, the Reigo sphere was cracking apart. Like how an egg would before the chick popped out, and with every second the cracks grew larger and larger. Go for it, Luffy. Chopper screamed out. Shatter it, Zoro yelled. And as if he heard the command, they heard Luffy's voice. Clear the SKYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYYY. They heard him screaming out and like that, the Reigo seemed to crack directly down the middle before it exploded, within itself and blew out to reveal the bright sunshine. They all stared up at it, almost becoming blind from the bright light that engulfed the land. Most of the Straw Hats were stunned by what they saw, even though most of them had seen this before. He broke it. Chopper gasped out, the sky suddenly returning to a clear and beautiful day, never guessing that there was ever anything there. That is so badass. Frankie screamed out excitedly. I can't believe that worked, Sanji muttered, fighting his own awe. Did you all know that he could do that? Nami asked them, hoping it wasn't just her that had been stunned that day. Even now, it sent chills up her spine. No, Robin beamed. I think he likes surprising people. Luffy may not always be the smartest person, but his instincts and behavior are similar to a wild animal's. She doubted that Luffy knew what he was doing, but simply relied on his instincts and counterattacks to take over. But where is he? Brook cried out just as they could hear a familiar voice yelling from above them, which could only mean one thing. Luffy. Chopper screamed joyfully as they saw him falling from the sky, heaving his right arm back and it twisted around tightly. Do it, take him out. Usopp cheered on, punching the air as Eneru's face was contorted with rage. You destroyed my Reigo. You insolent blue sea ape. Eneru yelled in outrage. But Luffy was far from done. You're next. He yelled, traces of a smirk back on his face. I'll ring you along with the bell. Oh, he did, Nami said, her eyes wide as she continued to watch in amazement. Impudent fool. Eneru shouted and lightning burst out of his body, growing bigger and bigger until a giant of a creature was there, one that looked like how you would expect a thunder god to look. One made out of lightning and forging not one, but two, golden tridents which he crossed over in front of him as they burned with electricity. Holy hell, Frankie screamed out in shock. What is he? Usopp yelled in panic. Now that is something you don't see every day, Sanji whispered, hoping that he didn't sound impressed. Ring the bell. Eneru yelled at him as he held up his massive arm. Is that what you said? You must be one of those fools who believes in the old legend. When the bell rings, it will mean the end of the war between Skypiea and Shandora. I am God. Luffy seemed to finally have enough of him as well. But Eneru sent a blast of lightning so strong that it lit up the sky and shook everything around them. The attack hit Luffy head on and Eneru was now ranting on, almost as if trying to convince himself more than Luffy. I don't care how strong you are, you're still just a Paramesha type. You could never match the might of my Logia power no matter how hard you might try. No matter what you might do. Like that matters here, Zoro said in annoyance. Did he already forget that kind of beatdown that Luffy was giving him before? Robin said, but it's true, no matter what kind of devil fruit power you have, they all have their weaknesses. That won't work on me. Luffy declared and they all smiled as he burst through Eneru's lightning and was running along Eneru's supercharged arm. And quit calling yourself God. Luffy suddenly went on, his face full of anger. What kind of God destroys everything and saves nothing? Fake. And with those words, Luffy made it to Eneru's head and actually kicked him so hard that blood burst from his mouth. Now that was satisfying, Sanji said shaking his head. Tell me about it, Zoro agreed, about time someone hit him. I'm just sorry it wasn't me and my blades. He was also impressed with what Luffy had said there. He noticed that Luffy sometimes had a habit of saying things with a lot more weight and, occasionally, wisdom than even he realizes without thinking or meaning to. But as they watched on, they saw that one of Eneru's tridents had come swinging up to try and spear Luffy. But as the weapon came up, Luffy was forced to grab hold of the blade to stop it from killing him from the back. However, they all saw that he was still in a lot of trouble here, for the arm that still had the golden ball was now stretching even farther away from him, thus forcing him backwards and leaning heavily on the trident. Oh no! Brook gasped, now biting on his fingers anxiously. The hand that Luffy held onto the trident was burning, steam actually boiling up beneath his fingers as he screamed in pain. "No, Luffy!" Usopp and Chopper cried out fearfully. But Eneru was laughing once again. "Well done, Rubberman, that was very agile of you. You grabbed it before you could be impaled." They could hear Memory Nami screaming out in worry below them, but they only focused on the fight as Eneru laughed triumphantly. "But what will you do now?" he sneered. "You have nowhere to run. The pull of the golden ball will pull you deeper and deeper onto my trident. And if you were to let go, you would fall to your death below." Hell, he's caught between a rock and a hard place. Usopp cringed, wondering just what choice Luffy was going to do now. Though he had a very good idea to what he was about to do. Luffy was fighting to get away, but the weight was too much for him and Eneru noticed this as well. "I admit, I'm impressed you made it this far," he grinned insanely. "But this is the end for you, boy, and this land, everything. I can easily create another Rago." Steam was coming from Luffy's clenched teeth from the heated trident when his eyes suddenly snapped open as if he was remembering something, and then he let go of the trident and allowed himself to fall. "What's he doing now?" Frankie cried out desperately. "So, you prefer to fall, do you?" Eneru laughed in victory. "Luffy, no." Memory Nami screamed as Luffy fell past her. But just as they were all thinking that he was going to continue to fall, Luffy suddenly stretched up and grabbed hold of Nami's cloud, dangling there like a worm on a hook. He ordered Nami to get out of the way. "What's this?" Eneru exclaimed in shock, finally noticing something was wrong. "You should never mess with me, earlobes." Luffy yelled and they all sneered at the name as Luffy then cried out, "Now Gum Gum, rocket." And he launched himself up. The golden ball was continuing to twist around, and as they hovered in the air, they knew that this was going to be the finishing move. They all held their breath, knowing that this was going to be the moment they had been waiting for since they heard about Eneru. Eneru mocked Luffy about trying the same old attack again, but Luffy's eyes were filled with determination. "I'll keep trying till the bell rings," he declared. "You tell him," Sanji yelled. Eneru was now holding up his tridents and proclaimed that he was going to skewer him. But Luffy had already won in their books. "Gum Gum, golden rifle," he screamed as he heaved the golden ball in front of him and threw his punch so strongly that it was like the blast from a cannon. One so fast that Eneru could have avoided, and his eyes widened in shock, unable to avoid it. Their hearts all beat a little faster as Luffy's attack smashed right into God, with such force that it tore up the top of the arc and was sent flying back. Eneru could no longer hold on to that form and changed back as Luffy's attack broke right through it all, and he was sent flying back to where they finally spotted it floating on a cloud. The golden bell, which was as beautiful as the city of Shandora, and it was this that Eneru had crashed into. "Let it rinnnnnnngggggggggg." Luffy screamed as Eneru slammed into the bell. The impact was so great that parts of the bell broke and the ball on Luffy's broke part as more blood poured from Eneru's mouth. "Hey Pops, can you hear it?" Luffy screamed out at the top of his lungs. "The city of gold is here. For 400 years, the city of gold has been in the skyyyyyyyyyy. And then they heard it, a loud ringing echoed across the blue sky. A ringing that seemed to strike something within each and every one of them. It was astoundingly beautiful, like some kind of voice from the past telling them of a great civilization that was still there. "Amazing," Brook whispered in awe. The bell was knocked from the cloud, as well as Eneru and the arc. Luffy's slightly singed arm retracted as they were falling with him. He beamed as he punched the air in triumph. "Are you listening, Pops? Saruyyama brothers." Luffy screamed once again as he fell back. "I did it. The city of gold. It was right hhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhh. And the bell continued to ring loudly even as the broken ship fell with Eneru into the white sea and landed next to Memory Nami on the clouds. They could all hear the bell ringing several more times as it fell. Each ring seemed to be filled with faith and hope that resounded across the sky. "Beautiful as the last time," Robin smiled as they stood there and listened. "So that's what happened," Zoro smirked. "Not bad, Captain. It rang," Luffy said softly, as past Nami merely smiled. "Hey, I wonder if Pops heard it," he added as she smiled at him. "Yeah, I'm sure he did," she said firmly as the memory faded. "That was so great," Chopper cried out as Frankie sniffled at the sound. "He really did it, didn't he?" He asked. "Man, I really hope the old-timer heard it as well. I hope that they know that all their years of searching have paid off after all." "What happened after all that?" Brook asked eagerly, not wanting to wait for the memories. "Luffy got us off that cloud with his gum-gum balloon," Nami answered with a smile, "and we ended up making it back to the ship so that I could change and let Kanis know that we were alright. The Skypians and the Shandorians then all met on the upper yard in the ruins. And we must have partied there for like 4 days," Sanji laughed. "And they were all getting along?" Frankie asked in concern. At that moment no one cared, Robin answered them. With so much lost, everyone was able to understand each other. The war truly did end and they realized just how foolish it had been all these years. Everyone celebrated their lives, the end of the war, and of course Eneru getting his ass kicked. Zoro nodded. That was all that mattered. It is a sad way for it to end, Brook said softly as he looked up at the dark sky that was still scattered with stars, as if hoping that he could see the island itself there. But, at least they were all alive. And that is all that matters. In the next memory, they were back in the forest and the sun was bright and behind them they could see Robin and the boys all running towards them. Usopp had a sack of dials on his back, while Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy each carried sacks of gold with Chopper and Robin bringing up the rear. Where'd you get the gold? Frankie asked in surprise as they caught up with them and began to run as well. It was the gold inside the snake, remember? Nami asked. When it fell asleep after all that dancing, Luffy took us inside and we took all the gold we could find there. Wow, Brook said, if I didn't see it all firsthand, I never would have believed such a story, yo-ho-ho-ho. I know what you mean, Sanji laughed as his past self turned and began running backwards as he kept his eyes behind him. I mean, I was here, and I don't believe it either. Looks like they gave up. Memory, Sanji called. I don't see anyone. Who? Frankie asked them curiously. Well, they sure wouldn't be happy with us taking all that gold, Usopp said as his past self muttered something about a cannon the warriors were carrying in memory. Robin blinked in surprise. Their cannon, she repeated, sounding lost. That are you talking about? Nami asked in annoyance. They were carrying a big cannon towards us. Usopp yelled out. There's gratitude for you. Yeah, you know. That big thing the warriors were carrying towards us. Memory, Usopp demanded at Robin. Didn't you see it? Oh, you mean that thing? Past Robin smiled as if she knew something that they didn't. Just asking, that thing was wrapped up, what makes you think that it was a cannon? Current, Robin asked in amusement. What else could it have been? Chopper asked as Memory. Usopp was telling Robin off, saying that it wasn't funny, which past Chopper was jumping up and down in agreement as they ran. We made it. Luffy yelled from the front, there's Nami and Kanis. And when they looked forward, they could see the battered shape of the Mary right in front of them. Where? Memory, Sanji cried out, spinning around, calling out the girls' names before he ran right into a tree branch. Funny that you didn't run into anything with your back turned, Chopper laughed a little. Dumbass, Zoro muttered. You shut up, you shitty swordsman. Sanji snapped, and now they were almost nose to nose as they glared at each other. Alright, Nami sighed as she pushed them apart, break it up. Can't you two just grow up for 5 minutes? Memory, Robin had finally called back to Sanji, after they left him behind for a while, are you okay? But then he jumped up and caught up with them as if nothing had happened. Oh yeah, he cried happily, and they understood that here they were finally leaving Sky Island behind. It was a sad thing to see, but also a great relief. You all left without saying goodbye? Brook asked them in surprise. Well, after taking what was left of the gold, we didn't think they'd be happy to see us off, Sanji shrugged. We did end up saying goodbye to Isa though, Nami added as she smiled at the memory. By the time they left, Isa seemed to hero worship Luffy as a role model. They watched as they climbed on board the Mary with Kanis, Pagaya, and Sue on another bright purple waver that was blowing a loud, annoying horn. But no one minded as they put all their loot in the cabin and pushed off from shore. It was a fun thing to watch, sailing along smoothly across the White Sea, and laughing about everything that's happened. Along the Wally, they all ended up changing their burnt and torn clothes into fresh ones, and they knew that they were all truly ready to leave this place and go on to their next adventures. After a short time, Kanis called from next to them, okay. We're almost there. Everyone, see that up ahead? That's Cloud End. Everyone ran to the front of the ship to see the beautiful gate, looking different from Heaven's Gate, with twin fountains and even a bright rainbow right over the entrance. So that's where we go back down from? Luffy asked her. Frankie whistled as he looked at it. These guys sure don't skip out on details, right? Almost like they're happy to say goodbye to any visitors, Robin joked lightly. We got here sooner than I thought. Memory, Usopp laughed before the excitement seemed to fade from Luffy's face. Ah, do we really have to go back already? He whined. You mean he wanted to stay? Brook asked. It's not every day that you get to visit a place like this, Nami laughed, fully understanding what Luffy meant. And after everything that we went through up here, it's been like we've been here for years. The others seemed to agree with that. You know, Memory, Sanji said, as crazy as it sounds, I'm actually gonna miss this place. And I was right, Current, Sanji said, it does sound crazy. You think I'd be happy to see the back of this island? I think it's about time we say goodbye to the White Sea, Memory, Zoro said as Chopper swung his feet happily from the railing. Sky Island sure is fun, but scary too, he said happily. I couldn't see anything fun about it, Frankie laughed a little as Usopp told them apparently there was going to be a milky road to take them back to the Blue Sea. And they were all wondering just when, or if, they'd ever see this place again. Well, you never know, past Usopp said. Kanis and the others sped on ahead a little so that they could get off and run alongside the ship on a platform attached to the gate, calling to them that this was as far as they could go with them. It's too bad that Kanis couldn't come with us, Chopper sighed. I think it's for the best, Zoro said firmly. They need people like her and her old men up here. Fair point, Nami chuckled as Kanis was now waving to them. Take care of yourselves, she called to them, and they were all calling goodbyes to her and the others. Sitting on the Mary's head, Luffy said, "It was nice meeting you guys. Thanks for everything." But Canis was shaking her head, looking a little teary-eyed as she said, "No. You got it wrong. We're the ones who should be thanking you. We'll never forget you. Thanks to you all." "Boy, I can't tell if you guys have terrible timing, or the best timing in the world," Frankie said, shaking his head. "I often wonder that too," Nami nodded. "Goodbye Canis, old guy, furball. Take care now." Luffy called and their final goodbyes were said. Pagaya then yelled, "Now take care of yourselves and hold on tight. You're in for a bumpy ride." "Bumpy nothing," Usopp hissed, "we all nearly had heart attacks thanks to that stupid road." "Why? What happened?" Brook asked at once. "Just prepare yourself," Zoro said in his usual bad mood. The memory Straw Hats all knew each other so well by now, that they knew just what it was to do as they ran around the deck and prepared the ship to sail once again. But then a small south bird came out of nowhere, crashed into Luffy and fell to the deck. "Where'd he come from?" Frankie muttered as Memory Chopper quickly translated that the bird didn't want them to leave without him. "Oh, that's the south bird we brought up here with us," Past Nami said as they neared ever closer to the gate. "Poor little guy, this was probably not a vacation he wanted to take," Brook said sympathetically. "I hate south birds anyway," Zoro muttered darkly. Memory Nami then called to Luffy that the log pose was ready and they were off to the next island. "Great," Luffy beamed as they went through the gate, "let's go. Once we get to the bottom we'll start a brand new adventure. Guys, get ready. Blue Sea, here we come." And they all cheered behind him as the milky road curled into a gentle curve for a moment. They held on and enjoyed the ride as they waved back to Canis one last time. "Everyone," she called, "grab a hold of something. The free fall's about to start." "Did she just say a free fall?" Frankie asked nervously. "Uh-huh," they all said before they looked down in time to see that the ship was hovering in the air after it had gone flying off the edge. The memory Straw Hats all practically had their eyes popping out of their heads as they looked up in time to see Canis and the others one last time. Her hands were in the air as she called out one word, "Hesso." And then they fell, but as they screamed in terror, something burst out of the clouds besides them as they fell and they stopped falling. Brook and Frankie screamed this time as they saw that it was the tentacles of a giant octopus wrapping around the Mary. And suddenly everything stopped. The Straw Hats fell to the deck, each of them looking stunned to what had just happened. "Now I thought I'd seen it all," Frankie croaked out as he stared at the underside of the octopus. Memory Usopp and Chopper screamed worse than ever at the sight of it, and Memory Zoro looked ready to try and kill it. But thankfully the sudden stop threw them all off balance and they were on the deck, holding on tightly. "I say that was a good thing," Robin told him. "After all, if you had killed it, we'd all be dead." Brook just realized what she meant as he gasped out, "It's a balloon." "An octopus balloon?" Frankie asked as Luffy was putting it out to them all as well. Memory Usopp was looking much like how he looked when they first arrived in the current Usopp side, one last scare, before we left this city in the sky. Once the Straw Hats realized that they were safe, they slowly began to laugh at that. Just then they heard the sounds of the bell ringing once again, the people of the sky's way of saying goodbye. They all smiled as they listened to the beautiful sound. Both past and present Straw Hats closed their eyes as their ears were filled with the sounds of the bell ringing in their ears. The sound, it was almost as if they were saying, "Thank you." And the memory faded with one last ring of the golden bell, the very heart of the City of Gold. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch.